Chapter 1942. The Wind Forest's Starry Cavern Abode. Helena stood on a platform, and below her stood Sally, and the remaining 6 10th-tier powerhouses of the elven race. I'm going to attend this peace conference in person to fight for more benefits for the elven race. Helena looked at everyone, and said in a dignified voice, "In the past 3 years, the power of the elven race has been declining. I heard that many of our young elves have been bewitched. After I leave, you have to keep an eye on things. Don't let others take advantage of this and cause more trouble." "Yes," everyone replied in unison, not daring to look at Helena. "During this time, Sally will be managing the forest in my place. If you have any problems, report them to her, and she'll make the decision," Helena continued as she looked down at Sally. Sally also looked at her and nodded slightly. All of the elven powerhouses had different expressions upon hearing this, but they still nodded in agreement. During this period of time, Helena had entrusted Sally with an important task and nurtured her in all aspects. She had already regarded her as her successor. Sally had indeed lived up to her expectations. She had become more and more mature in handling matters, and her power had already broken through to the 8th tier. She had become the most outstanding elven powerhouse of the younger generation after Irina. "You can all go now." "Sally, stay," Helena said in an indifferent voice. All of the elves quickly left, and only Sally and Helena were left in the massive starry cavern abode. Helena took a step forward and landed lightly in front of Sally. With her back facing her, she said in an indifferent voice, "Do you know why I'm handing the elven race to you? You don't have many choices in the current elven race," Sally said in an equally indifferent voice as she looked at Helena's back. "You're becoming more and more like her." Helena turned around and looked into Sally's eyes, as if she was trying to see through her heart. "Isn't this what you want?" Sally didn't avoid her gaze, and continued to speak in an indifferent voice. Helena smiled with a hint of self-mockery in her voice. "Yes, I have to admit that Irina is the most outstanding prodigy of the elven race in the past 1,000 years. Then why did you kill her? It's not always a good thing to have a prodigy. She tried to overthrow the elven race that we built with our blood, but she still refused to come to her senses. I had no choice but to kill her in order to protect the elven race." Helena's expression was a little regretful. Maybe the people who left the Wind Forest got the life they really wanted. Sally bit her lips and tried to make her tone and choice of words as calm as possible. That's impossible." There was a hint of disdain and decisiveness in Helena's voice as she said, "This is a cruel world, and their so-called freedom won't be able to provide them with any protection. The elves who are stranded outside will be bullied and toyed with by other races. That's definitely not the life that elves want. But in the Wind Forest, they were bullied and played by their clansmen. Is this the life they want?" Sally asked. "If you want to receive protection, you have to pay a price, and those heroes who have paid should also receive more rewards." Helena's gaze sharpened instantly. She looked at Sally with narrowed eyes and said, "Are you doubting me?" "No, I just want to know. When you and Her Majesty led the elves to fight against the invading demons and orcs, did you think about how to distribute the elves who fought with you after you won the battle? You were their most trusted high priestess," Sally said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. "If you continue to have such thoughts, then you're really a terrible princess," Helena said with a frown. Sally looked at her and pursed her lips without saying anything. Helena turned around and solemnly said, "Go back and think about what the elven race would be like without the queen and me." Sally was silent for a while before she turned and left. After a long time, a sigh came from the starry cave. Rodu. The palace's meeting hall was still brightly lit. Chaos City has already formed an alliance with the dwarves, goblins, giant dragons, orcs, and other races. Alex, Irina, and that mysterious Lantist are also involved. I'm afraid we won't be able to squeeze anything out of them when we go to Chaos City this time," Andre said to his confidants with a dark expression. All the officials also looked very solemn. Originally, with the Roth Empire's current power, together with the forest trolls, they would be invincible on the Norland continent, one in the north and one in the south. But now that Bruno was dead, the forest trolls' line was completely broken. And the news that came back today was that the king of the dwarves, the chief of the goblins, and the rest had arrived at Chaos City in advance, and were having a secret meeting. Although the Roth Empire was powerful, it wasn't powerful enough to dominate the Norland continent. The alliance of a few weak races was already a headache. With the addition of the giant dragons, Alex and Irina, the duo, it was even more unbearable. At this moment, they couldn't help but think that if Alex didn't betray the Roth Empire, and instead became the Roth Empire's military commander, the ones who would be trembling now would be the other races. Your Majesty, Alex is a human, after all, and has been the commander of our Northwestern Allied Army for many years. Can we persuade him to submit to our Roth Empire again with reason and emotion? An official said. Fool, Count, have you forgotten that Alex has consecutively hurt the second prince and the first prince? How can such a strange person submit to the Empire again? Even if he really agrees to return, we have to be careful of his true intentions. It's tantamount to inviting a wolf into the house, a general said loudly. The ministers began to argue with each other about whether or not to enlist Alex. Josh sat at the side quietly. All right. Andre interrupted their argument with a frown. They were arguing about useless things. He turned to look at Josh. Josh, what do you think? Josh stood up and respectfully said, Your Majesty, I think that since the various races have decided to join forces against the Empire, the peace conference is no longer meaningful. Why don't we strike first and gain the upper hand by attacking them? With the absolute advantage of our powerhouses and cavalry, we can occupy some of their territories quickly. All the officials looked at Josh in shock. The second prince was gentle and liked magic. They didn't expect him to come up with such a radical plan. Andre's brows relaxed a little when he heard that. He nodded with a smile and said, This is an interesting suggestion. Your Majesty, this matter must be taken seriously. An official stood up and worriedly said, The peace conference hasn't started, and the peace treaty hasn't expired yet. If we force our troops, we might be criticized by the other races. Chapter 1943. It was a dark and windy night. Tens of thousands of cavalrymen were gathering at the northwestern border of the Roth Empire. Recently, the Orc tribe's invasion had been decreasing, but the number of cavalrymen deployed from various places had been increasing silently. Those who had been at the border for some time knew that the northwestern border was going to change. Over the years, the various military regions had been rotating in the northwestern military region. They had relied on the constant battles with the orcs to train their combat power, and had always maintained a balance of numbers. However, recently, the elites from various armies had been sent to the northwestern military region continuously, but the original garrison troops had not left. This made people start to have other thoughts. These years, the orcs had been harassing the Roth Empire's borders, and many villages had been raided. Furthermore, after many years of fighting, both sides had suffered injuries and deaths. The hatred had accumulated, and all the soldiers had a fire in their hearts. If they had the chance, they wouldn't mind charging into the orcs with their swords and horses. Now they only lacked an order from Rodu, and they could cross the mountains in front of them, charge into the Twilight Forest, and make that fertile land and vast forest part of the Roth Empire's territory. At the southern border of the Roth Empire, the number of border troops had also been increasing gradually recently. Although the official order had not been issued, many military generals already knew that the Roth Empire might go to war on all fronts, and they had planted the Roth Empire's flag further away. The hearts of the Empire's soldiers were slowly swelling like their power had been increasing over the years. That big city in the south that could be compared to Rodu was still not worth mentioning in their eyes. Vic Mountain. The elves had already entered a state of war. Evacuate all important facilities and personnel into the underground cavern. Pay close attention to the Roth Empire's movements. Once a large-scale army appears, don't fight them head-on. Retreat as you fight in the underground cavern to stop them from advancing quickly. At the same time, preserve your strength and reduce the casualties to the greatest extent. A goblin elder ordered. The suspension bridge of Isen Castle rose slowly and completely isolated the entire castle from the outside world. The foreign tribes in the city had all been chased out of the castle a few days ago. All the exits had been sealed, and soldiers were stationed to guard them. Overnight, the situation on the Norland continent became very tense. All the races started to prepare for war. Before the results of the peace conference were announced, these measures would probably not be changed. After returning to the restaurant, Irina took a sip of red wine and said to Meg, who was sitting opposite her, "It went smoother than I thought. Peace is in the interest of most races. This result is actually within my expectations," Meg said with a smile. "Do you think Andre will come tomorrow? Or will he start the war in advance?" Irina asked. If Andre starts the war in advance, the Roth Empire would be able to conquer the Twilight Forest in the west or the Wind Forest in the east in a very short time, given their current power. Meg said with a serious expression. Furthermore, once the occupation becomes an established fact, and the Roth Empire no longer attacks the other races, then the race whose territory has been invaded will have a hard time asking the other races to reclaim their territory. The Beastmen have already joined the Peace Alliance. Irina frowned. Meg shook his head. Benefits come first between races. We will uphold justice for Connie, but even the giant dragons will not go against the Roth Empire directly for the Beastmen. The purpose of this alliance is actually more of a deterrent effect. However, if the Beastmen are really invaded, as long as he can withstand the first wave of attacks and create some time for the alliance to send reinforcements, I believe the other races will still be willing to send an army to assist their allies. This is more in line with the interests of the other races. Irina nodded thoughtfully. Even people of the same race might not be able to do their best. It was indeed unrealistic to expect the other races to protect you. In that case, do we need to send reinforcements to the Beastmen in advance? Irina asked again. Based on my understanding of Andre, he will not do such a thing without a valid reason. Meg shook his head with a smile, and said, once he tears up the peace treaty and attacks the Beastmen or elves, it will be equivalent to standing directly against the Peace Alliance, or even the other races. Then, the other races will have a reason to join forces to deal with him. Even if he can obtain the Twilight Forest and the Wind Forest in a short time, this will bring about a joint blockade from the other races, as well as a possible encirclement and annihilation. Do you think he will give up his ambition to invade other races because of the establishment of the Peace Alliance? He is obviously not such a person, so I am very curious how he will respond to this to fulfill his ambition. Meg shook his head slightly. Seems like the peace conference tomorrow will be very interesting. Irina's lips curled up into a smile. Father, you are finally back. Amy ran downstairs and looked at the two of them drinking red wine. She put her hands on her waist and angrily said, "Have you forgotten about us?" and came downstairs quietly with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and looked at Meg and Irina with a smile. "Aya, I forgot that our two little cuties haven't eaten yet. What do you want to eat? I will make it for you right away." Meg looked at the two little ones, and slapped his head as he stood up. Too many things had happened today, and he had forgotten about Amy and Anne. Speaking of which, we haven't had dinner either. Irina also looked at him. That's just right. Let's have a good meal. Meg pinched Amy's cheek with a smile and said, Father will cook roast goose for you tomorrow. Roast goose? Really? Amy's eyes immediately lit up, and she swallowed her saliva. Then, she looked back at Ugly Duckling, and her smile became even more vibrant. It has wings. Meow? Ugly Duckling meowed. I am not a real cat, but you are a real dog. Where is Anne? What do you want to eat? Meg asked in again, and stroked Ugly Duckling's head. You want to eat roast goose too? Meg glanced at Ugly Duckling. Meow? Ugly Duckling's orange fur stood up. Meg went into the kitchen, and soon made a sumptuous dinner. When the last dish, spicy crayfish, was served, everyone started to eat. Father, will the restaurant be open tomorrow? Amy asked as she nibbled on the crayfish that Meg had peeled for her. I might have to take another day off to study roast goose. Meg answered with a smile. The peace conference would be held tomorrow afternoon, and as an important representative, he naturally had to attend. With roast goose in hand, he naturally wasn't afraid that the customers would scold him afterward. Okay. I love roast goose the most. Amy nodded. Every time she passed by the roast goose restaurant, she couldn't move her feet. Although her father's roast duck was super delicious, she still wanted to try the real roast goose. Chapter 1944. On the eve of the peace conference, Chaos City was very peaceful. However, messenger pigeons flew out of the city from time to time, indicating that not everyone could sleep peacefully. Normal people might treat this day as a festival, but to Chaos City, this was an annual event. As Chaos City was established on this day, many children were looking forward to the festival tomorrow, apart from the rulers of the various races. Some well-informed merchants were also finding it difficult to sleep. At the Buffett Manor, standing behind Ian, who was fishing under the moonlight, the Hill wore a worried expression as she said, "I wonder what the outcome of tomorrow's peace conference will be." With Alex's efforts, the Peace Alliance has already been established. Even if Andre's ambitions don't die, it'll be very difficult for him to create any more waves, Ian said calmly. You said that Andre is a calm lunatic, and he could do anything. The Hill's brows were still tightly furrowed, but he never does anything stupid. This is also the reason why he can make the Roth Empire become more powerful. Ian smiled and said, if he were a businessman, he would also be a very successful businessman. The Hill was deep in thought. Actually, everyone should thank Alex. He is a true warrior. He is both brave and smart. Ian looked at the moon on the surface of the water and sighed with emotion. It's hard to imagine that such a young man, who has experienced the lowest point of his life and reached the peak of his martial arts, can still use his martial arts with such restraint. He clearly knows what he wants to do and can execute it perfectly. A young man like him is really rare. Alex is indeed a very outstanding person. The Hill nodded slightly, even though she didn't really care about those so-called powerhouses. This man who was changing this world deeply still attracted her attention. She had once thought that she should be one of the most powerful people among the young people. The Buffett Manor's massive financial empire gave her a lot of power over the entire Norland continent. However, when this world gradually became chaotic, she realized that her power was not stable. She couldn't even make this world change because of her. However, young powerhouses like Alex and Irina had stepped forward at a time like this. Their every action was changing the situation of this world, and everyone had no choice but to listen to them carefully. Money is the most worthless thing in this chaotic world. Strength is everything, Ian said with a smile. Money may be useless, but technology is. The train line to Vic Mountain has already been tested successfully. Once the war starts, we can send soldiers directly to Vic Mountain. A smile also on the Hill's face. Ian slowly turned his head to look at Hill, and the smile on his face grew brighter. What I thought most about you wasn't your keen financial sense, but your courage to innovate and not be afraid of failure. I don't need a caretaker. What I want is a successor who can lead the Buffett family into the next great era. I'm sure you can do this well. I will try my best to live up to your expectations. Hill nodded slightly. At the Moraton Manor. Master, I heard that things haven't been very peaceful recently. Why don't we go into hiding? I heard that the Roth Empire is going to attack soon. It's not a good idea to stay in Chaos City. Denise walked into Jeffrey's study and looked at Jeffrey with a nervous expression. Jeffrey looked at her and coldly chided. Ignorant woman, you had no choice but to take refuge in Rodu. If the Roth Empire is going to attack Chaos City, how can you run to Rodu? We're just merchants. We have businesses in Rodu, and we're also humans. As long as we don't say anything, who will know? Denise was getting anxious. My family Moraton thrives because of Chaos City. How can we retreat like this? Jeffrey said in a serious voice. Master, if you don't leave, then I'll leave with Cyril and the others. My family has already prepared a flying steed, and will set off tonight. Denise's eyes were averting her gaze. Jeffrey looked in the direction of the door and coldly said, Get in here. Cyril ducked his head and entered the room reluctantly. He didn't dare to look at Jeffrey with his head lowered. Instead, he hid behind Denise and softly said, Father, come with us. We'll take all of our family assets with us. and we'll be able to enjoy ourselves in Rodu. Perhaps we'll be able to live even better than in Chaos City. You bastard. Jeffrey smashed the cup beside Cyril's feet. The tea and porcelain shards splashed all over his feet. If you don't want to go, then so be it. I'm going to leave with Mother and Uncle anyway. I can't stay and die with this lousy city. Cyril jumped back and directly exited the study. Piss off. I'll pretend that I don't have a son like you. Jeffrey's hands and beard were trembling with rage. Master, we'll wait for you in Rodu. Denise didn't dare to stay for long either. She hurriedly turned and left. Soon Denise, Cyril's family, and a few servants carried all of their belongings onto a horse-drawn carriage and left the Moraton Manor. Jeffrey leaned heavily against the back of his chair and heaved a forlorn sigh. Right at this moment, a figure walked in with a small stove. Grandpa, it's getting cold. Let me make some hot tea for you. The small stove was placed on the coffee table, and the charcoal fire was burning brightly. Steam began to rise from the copper stove shortly after it was placed on the table. Jeffrey looked at Gloria, who was brewing tea with a serious expression, and asked, "Do you want to leave? If Chaos City is gone, where will I call home?" Gloria looked up at Jeffrey. This grandfather of hers had always been very imposing, but now, he looked like an ordinary old man. His forlorn expression was rather pitiful. Jeffrey's eyes lit up and he asked, "Aren't you afraid?" "I was a little afraid the last time in Rodu, but I'm not afraid now." Gloria shook her head. A smile appeared on Jeffrey's face. He glanced at the teapot and said, "The tea smells very good. A guest gave it to me. He said that he picked it from his farm. I've brewed it once, and I think it tastes good. So I'm giving it to you to try," Gloria said with a smile. Soon the tea was ready. Gloria poured a cup for Jeffrey and placed it in front of him. Jeffrey looked at Gloria with a calm and serious expression and said, "Tomorrow, I'll announce that you're the head of Family Moraton. No pop-up window." Chapter 1945. People like Mr. Mac are usually called arsonists. They only light the fire, but they are not responsible for putting it out every time. Shouldn't it be the dream of 900 million girls? I used to think that potential could solve all problems. Until I met Mr. Mac, I realized that being rich doesn't mean you can eat well. It all depends on the mood of the boss. The next morning, the customers saw the new notice hanging on the door, and they couldn't stay calm. "That's good. At least we can eat the new product tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it." As expected, Mr. Mac's talent is enough to make the girls find excuses for him. "I'm a humble customer, a silly person who just wants to eat a cup of soy milk with youtiao." Meg stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the customers who left in disappointment. He murmured to himself, "I suddenly feel a little guilty." Irina walked up and said to him, "What you're going to do today is to let them have more time to eat at Amy's. What do you want to eat for breakfast?" Meg tilted his head and looked at her. "Rainbow fried rice with soy milk," Irina said without hesitation. "Okay." Meg nodded. "I want to eat roast goose, Amy said enthusiastically as she came downstairs. Ugly Duckling, which was about to go forward, was stunned. Then, it slowly walked backward to Anne's feet and hid behind her. "I'm tired of eating roast goose in the morning. Let's eat it at night, okay?" Meg said with a smile. He didn't want to eat roast goose in the morning. He had made roast goose the whole night, and there were some side effects. He needed to rest first. "Okay, then we'll eat it at night." Amy was a little reluctant, but she still nodded obediently. Meg made a nutritious breakfast. While eating, she looked at Amy and said, "Dad has to go out today. Amy and N, do you want to go to the magic potion shop next door to play with Sister Cece, or go to the ice cream shop to play with your sisters?" "I want to go to the ice cream shop. I have an appointment with Miss Anna to play together," Xiaomi said without hesitation, and gestured with her hands and said, "I'll go to the magic potion shop first and learn magic from Sister Cece." "Okay, then little me will go to the ice cream shop to play with Anna, and Anne will go to the magic potion shop to learn magic." Meg nodded, fully respecting the children's choice. Mag was going to participate in the peace talks today. This was an important meeting that would affect the situation of the Norland continent and even decide the future of the Norland continent. In comparison, even making money seemed less important. Ding! The peace conference has triggered a hidden mission. A peaceful environment is conducive to the spread of good food. Host, please try your best to influence the conference and strive to maintain peace on the Norland continent. According to your influence on the conference, you will receive different rewards. Right at this moment, the system's voice suddenly sounded in Meg's mind. What are the rewards? Meg raised his eyebrows. According to the difficulty of the mission, the rewards for this mission will be beyond your imagination. Host, please work hard to complete the mission. Aren't you a hooligan? What's the use of giving me a pie? Meg pursed his lips. If you give me the ability to flatten people, I can make Andre hide in the palace's bunker and not dare to come out. Host, please recognize the truth. This system is just a gourmet system. Although I'm a little more well-rounded and outstanding, you can't just ask me to flatten people. That's not harmonious enough. And it's easy to be flattened. Come on. I've never seen a system get kicked out of the group chat every day. How embarrassing, Meg teased. Nonsense. That's because I kicked them out myself. I'm a lofty person, and I don't want to associate myself with them. You have no idea how two-faced that harmonious system is. It shares all of the things it flattens in the group chat every day. TSK, that big sister. If it weren't for the fact that I was kicked out of the group chat. Tui, if it weren't for the fact that I kicked out of the group chat on my own accord, I would have definitely been flattened by now. Can I talk to you through one of them? Sure. That guy is everywhere. In the end, Meg wasn't able to get any information about the rewards from the system. However, he was able to confirm one thing. The system really did have a group chat, and there were many different systems in it. This guy had definitely been kicked out of the group chat before. Let's go. Amy and Ann finished their breakfast before holding hands and walking out the door. Ugly Duckling hopped into Amy's arms and snuggled up comfortably. Soon it began to purr. Snare sent me a secret letter 2 days ago. The flames of freedom have already blossomed all over the Wind Forest. They've decided to take advantage of Helena's departure from the Wind Forest to seize control of the forest, Irina said as she looked at Meg. Meg thought for a moment before shaking his head. That's going to be very difficult. There are more high-grade elves joining the fray this time. Meg shook his head and said, however, they've lost their base of support, and there aren't enough elves who have chosen to side with the night elves. Trying to seize control of the Wind Forest is nothing more than a pipe dream. It's more likely that Helena will take advantage of this opportunity to ferret out all of the sparks hidden in the forest before snuffing them out in one fell swoop. Irina fell silent for a moment with a contemplative look on her face. She then looked at Meg and said, according to the book you gave me, there are bound to be sacrifices and bloodshed in revolutions. Blood can indeed evoke the bloodlust in people, but useless sacrifices are not conducive to liberating the Wind Forest. After losing this core group of elves, it will be even more difficult for them to infiltrate the Wind Forest again. Meg shook his head. Irina's brows furrowed slightly, and she nodded as she said, then I'll write him a letter. The annual peace conference was the founding day of Chaos City, and it was also the most important and lively festival in Chaos City. The City Lord's castle had already started decorating the streets in advance. Everyone was dressed in their best attire, and they were out on the streets. The lively shops and the shouts of hawkers on both sides of the streets were filled with liveliness and vitality. The ordinary people didn't seem to realize that this year's peace conference was different from the usual ones. As it was the most important day of the year and the longest holiday, people only wanted to shop and eat with their families and friends, or buy new clothes for themselves and their families. Meanwhile, the delicacy conference became the best place for Chaos City's residents to go. There were too many delicacies for the eyes to take in, and one would be able to obtain many delicacies just by walking around. The constant influx of people made the delicacy conference, which took up a very large area, very difficult to walk around. Meg stood on the opposite side of the street and took a look from afar. He marveled at how well the Food Association organized this conference. As long as one was capable enough, such a huge flow of people would definitely not bury any delicacies. Selling vegetables is indeed a good business. Meg's gaze landed on the customers lining up in front of the seafood stall. Many of the housewives bought a huge bag of seafood at once, and the elven service staff received unanimous praise for their efficient and friendly service. Chapter 1946. The city lord's castle was already under martial law, and the surrounding 3 streets were all sealed off in preparation for the peace conference. The representatives of the various races arrived one after another. The elven delegation led by Helena was the first to arrive today. The forest trolls delegation came right after. After Bruno was killed, they elected a new leader and kept a much lower profile. Oster led all the 10th tier powerhouses under him to Chaos City. Clearly, he was a little frightened by Alex. The 10 dragon tribes of the giant dragons had all sent representatives to attend the conference. Although Lewis and Douglas had joined the Peace Alliance on behalf of the giant dragons, the 2 of them were not enough to represent the interests of the entire giant dragon tribe in an event like the Peace Conference. The demons were in a similar situation. After the Abyss demons and Flaming demons got into a war, the internal division became very serious. The warring faction, which originally had the upper hand, also fell into internal strife and did not trust each other. Hence, the 10 demon tribes all sent representatives to attend the conference. There were even some smaller demon tribes that joined forces to elect representatives to attend the conference. The Roth Empire's delegation was the last to arrive. At the same time, it was also the largest delegation. The delegation led by Andre Edward had more than 50 people. Apart from a group of civil officials, there were also 10th tier powerhouses escorted by the Magus Tower's president, Richard, and the Empire's military's Grand Marshal Dominic. Andre really cherishes his life. He brought 10 10th tier powerhouses. Together with the 6 beside Sean, there are 16 of them, Michael said with a smile after hearing the report. Perhaps he wants to show off his muscles. He can casually bring 16 10th tier powerhouses out as escorts. This is something that no other race can do. Roland shook his head. No matter what, it's a good thing for us that Andre is here to attend the peace conference today. Michael stopped smiling, and his expression became serious. I should go and meet them. This peace conference is destined to not be harmonious. Before Michael could go out, Dicus had already hurried over. When he saw him, he anxiously said, City Lord, the representatives of the Abyss demons and Flaming demons are fighting outside the City Lord's castle. Do you think we should go and stop them? Isn't this a little too ridiculous? Michael frowned. He did not expect the feud between the 2 races to be so deep that they could actually fight on the eve of the peace conference. Let's go and take a look. Meg and Irina estimated the time. When they arrived outside the City Lord's castle, they happened to see an intense battle. On one side was an Abyss demon riding on a huge boar. On the other side was a Flaming demon covered in flames. The wild boar smashed through the stone slabs, and the raging flames melted the stone slabs. The 2 sides went back and forth in front of the City Lord's mansion, and the fight was very lively. The people who were watching the show were the representatives from the various races who had just arrived. The probability of something like this happening in such an occasion was extremely low. Why wouldn't they enjoy watching a show before the tense meeting? Give me some strength. Don't be like a sissy. Mag saw Camilla and Dracula in the crowd, who didn't mind blowing things up. His gaze passed through the crowd and landed on a group of people who were about to enter. The person in the lead was a dignified middle-aged man. It was the Emperor of the Roth Empire, Andre. Richard and Dominic led a group of 10 rank 10 bodyguards around him, and there were as many as 10 of them. These 10 people were not on the same level as the 6 beside Sean. They could be said to be the strongest 10th tier powerhouses in the Roth Empire. Andre seemed to have heard the reminder. He stopped in his tracks and turned to look in Meg's direction. He gave Meg a meaningful smile. Meg frowned. Andre gave him an unfathomable feeling. He was like an old fox. Andre walked into the City Lord's castle. Dominic looked at Meg with a complicated expression and followed him into the City Lord's castle. In Alex's memory, this empire's marshal was a powerful elder and leader who was full of chivalry. Back then, Alex had slowly risen to fame at the northwestern border. This empire's marshal had met him many times and helped him with his martial arts. In the past 20 years, the Roth Empire's cavalry had become stronger under Dominic's leadership. Back then, he intended to let Alex take over and become the next empire's marshal. He even wanted to transfer him to his side to train and groom him personally. However, this was rejected by Alex. He resigned from his position in the military and began to travel the continent to train his abilities. Why would Andre let Dominic follow him to attend the peace conference during such a critical period? If he were to stay in the Roth Empire's army now, he would be more intimidating than here. Furthermore, Andre did not lack this 10th tier guard. Even he was not confident of killing Andre under the protection of 15 10th tier powerhouses. I'm afraid Andre still hasn't given up on you, Irina said softly. It's just his wishful thinking. Meg pursed his lips. Stop. Stop, stop, stop. At this moment, Michael hurried out of the door and shouted. However, the Abyss Demon and the Flaming Demon, who were in a frenzy, did not take him seriously at all. They were still having fun fighting each other. Michael frowned and drew out a longsword. In the instant that the two separated, he threw the longsword out. Ding! The longsword stood between the two of them, showing off its sharpness. That Abyss Demon and Flaming Demon stopped charging forward almost at the same time, and looked at Michael instinctively. Michael looked at the two demons and solemnly said, "The two of you, this is Chaos City. The peace conference is being held here today. If the two of you have any disputes that you need to settle on the spot, please leave Chaos City to settle them yourselves, or settle them after the peace conference." Humph. The two demons looked at each other and snorted indignantly. However, they still stopped and did not continue fighting. Today's peace conference was due to the internal strife among the demons. They had to participate in it to fight for the greatest benefits for their race. After the conference, they had all the time in the world to settle the score. Michael then said to the various representatives who were watching the show, "The Parliament Hall has been opened. All the representatives can go to the Parliament Hall now. The peace conference is about to begin." "Irina, you're here too?" Dracula had already seen Meg and the rest. He came up to them with a smile and sized up Meg again. He clicked his tongue and said, "I thought I could suppress him after I became a progenitor. I didn't expect this fellow to become more and more perverted. He even killed Bruno just like that. He's not human." Chapter 1947. Camilla was half a step behind, as she looked at Meg curiously. Alex's series of actions during this period could be said to be extremely ostentatious, be it injuring the two princes of the Roth Empire consecutively, or killing Bruno on the eve of the peace conference. All of them had shocked the Norland continent. And now, this man was standing in front of her. Although he was wearing a black and white mask, that calm aura and restrained sharpness that was hard to ignore made people maintain a certain level of vigilance around him. Of course, with his power, her vigilance was useless. "That's because you haven't eaten enough grass. Why don't we take this opportunity to talk about the exhibition again? Let's get a VIP room first. These people who came to attend the conference are not short of money." Irina looked at Dracula with a smile. No, not this time. No matter what, I am still the most handsome vampire. I still have some burdens." Dracula shook his head. "Definitely next time?" Irina didn't force him. "Definitely next time." "Hello." Camilla greeted Irina. Although they used to eat at the same table for a period of time, she still had a natural fear of Irina, and only wanted to keep a distance from her. "Why don't the two of you form a competition? The uncle-niece performance will definitely be more entertaining." Irina's eyes lit up. "I refuse," Camilla said without hesitation. Eating in private was one thing, but it was too shameful for her to perform eating grass. It was not something she could do. "It's time to go in." Meg glanced at the empty City Lord's castle entrance and reminded her, "Let's talk about the exhibition next time." Irina walked in the direction of the City Lord's castle and curiously asked, "What's the attitude of the vampires towards this peace conference?" "We don't need any territory. What we have now is quite good," Dracula said. It is quite good. Irina nodded. She was quite satisfied with Dracula's answer. Mag also glanced at Dracula in surprise. This guy had thought things through quite thoroughly. In the enormous meeting hall, the circular table was already filled with representatives of various races. Chaos City arranged the seating arrangement of the representatives of the various races. At least, they didn't let the races with old grudges sit next to each other to prevent conflicts during the peace talks. However, the city lord's castle was obviously a little meticulous with the seating arrangements. The forest trolls and the Roth Empire's seats were separated by the giant dragon's representatives. The elven race's seats were arranged next to Chaos City's representative team, and the demons and orcs were between them and the Roth Empire. Outside of the central round table, there were 3 circles of seats where the experts of various races were seated. The representatives of the various races and the participants had basically all arrived, but the huge hall was silent. Only the sound of the staff of the city lord's mansion running back and forth could be heard. Irina and Alex have arrived. An announcement came from the door. Everyone's eyes turned to the door and fell on Alex and Irina, who walked in side by side. During this period of time, the two of them had been in the limelight. They were even more famous than when they were roaming the Norland continent. The elves were stirred up until they almost fell apart. They guided lightning to strike the devil and sealed it again. They killed Bruno, cut off one of Josh's ears, and chopped off one of Sean's arms. All these things pushed Alex and Irina's reputations to the peak. Compared to 3 years ago, Alex had become stronger and more flawless. He could do whatever he wanted, but no one could do anything to him. They didn't even know what Alex looked like now. That black and white mask blocked all prying eyes, and at the same time, made him even more dangerous. Unknown whereabouts, unknown appearance, unknown upper limit of power. All of these made Alex extremely dangerous. As for Irina, her radiance was overshadowed by Alex's halo. Furthermore, she had already left the Wind Forest, but she was still the elven princess in everyone's eyes. If there was a woman in this world who had the same aura as Alex, it would be Irina, and only Irina. However, not everyone liked the two of them. The Forest Trolls representative team looked at Alex, who had just walked in. Their eyes were red as they tried to control their emotions. Bruno's death made them lose a powerful leader, and also made the Forest Trolls suffer a lot of mockery. If not for the fact that they couldn't beat him, they wouldn't have been able to control their emotions. Rex looked at Meg with a gloomy gaze. It was too uncomfortable to look at him, but they couldn't kill him. However, they could only endure it. Helena's expression also became gloomy after the two of them walked in. In just a few months, the elves went from an above-average race to the joke of the Norland continent. It was all thanks to them. Irina had dug out more than half of the Wind Forest's foundation. She was having a headache about how to rebuild it. The representative of the horror demons also had a gloomy expression. However, he lowered his head and didn't even dare to look at Alex. Andre looked at Meg calmly. He was expressionless, and no one knew what he was thinking. Sean sat beside Andre. His empty left sleeve was a little glaring, but his expression was also very calm. He didn't seem to hold a grudge against Meg for losing his arm. Meg glanced at the people in the venue. Basically, all the people in charge of the various races were present. This was a rare sight. However, his gaze was attracted by the Roth Empire's representative team. Apart from Michael, Roland, and Novin, the 3 big shots of Chaos City, Crassus and Julian, were also present. When did Michael convince the two of them to join Chaos City? Mag was a little surprised. Regardless of whether it was influence or power, the addition of Crassus and Urian to Chaos City would undoubtedly increase Chaos City's power by leaps and bounds. It was just that Crassus was still in Rodu holding the opening ceremony for the Magus Tower's Magic Caster convention a few days ago. Now, he was sitting with Chaos City's representative team. It was a little magical. Meg and Irina sat down according to their placards. On Meg's left was the Forest Trolls representative team, and on Irina's right was the Orc War faction's representative team led by Oster. This seating arrangement is very spiritual. Meg looked around with a slight smile. The Forest Trolls representative team and Oster became much more nervous after Meg and Irina sat down. Don't be afraid. I'm not someone who would fight in such an occasion. Meg glanced at the forest troll, who was secretly swallowing his saliva. You know I love peace. I know. That forest troll nodded sullenly. Peek. Chapter 1948. This is your last chance. Believe me, as long as you do as I say, you will get everything you want. Supreme power, invincible power, and Irina, whom you have been longing for. As long as you do as I say, everything will be yours. In the dark and empty hall, Josh sat on the floor with his hair disheveled. His eyes were red, and he pursed his lips without saying a word. Only that seductive voice kept echoing in his mind. You have to know that no matter what the outcome of the peace talks is, you will be a useless pawn. If your father reconciles with Alex, you will be pushed out without hesitation. If the war starts, Sean will be put in an important position, and you will be useless. Are you willing to accept that? I'm the only one who can help you. I'm the only one who's truly on your side. Let go of your laughable ego, and accept me wholeheartedly. I'm going to make you the most powerful being on the Norland continent. I'm going to give you the power to crush Alex, and I'm going to unify the entire Norland continent. You're going to become the supreme ruler of this empire. Richard went down south with father. I am alone. How can I control the Roth Empire? Josh said with a hint of fatigue and powerlessness in his voice. If I say you can, you can. I can help you control everyone you want to control, and make them obey you completely. The ghostly voice sounded again. We need war. We need more power of resentment. The more power of resentment there is, the more powerful we can become. I can even summon an invincible army of undead knights for you to help you unify the Norland continent. Now the opportunity is here. Andre has taken away those powerhouses who are difficult to control. Rodu is already an empty city. As long as you agree, this city will belong to you. Undead cavalry. Josh's eyes lit up. You're saying that as long as more people die, more resentment will appear, and I'll become stronger? Yes. You will be stronger than Alex soon, and take revenge for your ear with your own hands. Alex. Josh stood up slowly with a strange smile on his pale face. Then let's start from the Magus Tower. Night elves in a hidden tree hole. Under the dim candlelight, a dozen masked elves squatted on the ground and looked at the young elf with burning eyes. The conditions aren't ripe yet, and there are still too few of us dark elves. If we act rashly, we'll only incur unnecessary casualties, and even destroy the foundation that we've just established. As such, we have to postpone the uprising. We have to continue to infiltrate and recruit more elves into our ranks. Snare said in a hushed voice. But Helena has left the Wind Forest. If we miss this opportunity, we won't have another chance. If we don't seize this opportunity to revolt and occupy the Wind Forest, it will only be more difficult in the future. A young elf turned to Snare with a perplexed expression, and said, The inspection of the night elves in the forest is becoming stricter and stricter. We've only just caught a few night elves a few days ago. And if we continue to drag this out, more of our companions will be captured before being taken down one by one. That's right. They're even offering handsome rewards to those who report them. There are even traitors among our ranks. And that's a huge blow to the morale of our members, another elf chimed in. The atmosphere in the tree hole became a little tense and solemn. They had taken a huge risk by coming here today, and they had come here to discuss the matter of the uprising. However, they didn't think that Snare would inform them that the uprising would be postponed. Snare's brows also furrowed upon hearing everyone's words. He knew all of this very well. In fact, he had attempted to rescue a captured night elf the day before, only to give up because the night elves were too heavily guarded. However, he had received a secret letter from Her Highness this morning. She didn't agree with their uprising, and believed that their chances of success were extremely low. This was in line with his judgment. Following the last slave uprising, the elven structure in the Wind Forest had been fractured to a certain extent. The elves who hadn't managed to escape were under extremely strict surveillance, and it was very difficult to infiltrate the elven army. The mid-level elves were the ones who benefited from the uprising, so it was even more difficult to get them to rebel. In order to ensure their safety, they were using a one-way communication system. At present, there were several thousand night elves underground in the Wind Forest, but he didn't know the exact number, nor did he know who the night elves were. Aside from trying to take control of the Wind Forest, their objective was to use their blood to incite more elves to join the uprising. This is Her Highness' opinion. At this stage, it's very difficult for her to appear in the Wind Forest to provide us with any assistance, Snare said. Her Highness. All of the elves fell silent upon hearing this. They were even more convinced by Irina's judgment. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Right at this moment, a sharp whistle suddenly sounded from outside. Snare's expression changed as he hurriedly yelled, "Crap! Someone's here! Retreat according to the plan." All of the elves hurriedly got up from the ground, before rushing out from behind the tree hole. Remember, be careful and don't expose yourselves. Put the plan on hold for now, and wait for the next meeting, Snare cautioned. All of the elves nodded before quickly dispersing. Snare also quickly departed from the scene, but he didn't go too far away. Instead, he squatted down on the branch of a lush tree in the distance, and put on his cloak inside out. A faint light lit up, and the color of the cloak gradually merged with the color of the tree trunk, making it difficult to tell that someone was hiding here. Around 3 minutes later, a group of over 100 elven guards arrived at the tree hole, under the lead of a middle-aged elf. After inspecting the tree hole, the elven guard let loose a few curses, before quickly departing with the rest of the elven guards. Looks like there's already a traitor among us. Snare put down his hat, and murmured to himself, as he looked on at the departing elven guards. He had changed the location of the gathering 3 times, and the last change was an hour ago. He was the one who had decided on the location, but the traitor had managed to find him so quickly. Thankfully, he had set up Nightingale around the perimeter in advance. Otherwise, all of the core members would have been wiped out. Right at this moment, a cold voice suddenly sounded behind him. There's a traitor among you, and there's more than one. Snare's hair stood on end as he hurled a string of flying daggers through the air, while hurtling back in retreat. A thin water barrier appeared, and the flying daggers were unable to advance any further. Chapter 1949. Snare's expression changed slightly upon seeing that his attack had failed, and he immediately turned to flee. However, water barriers appeared in all 3 directions, sealing off all avenues of escape. Don't be nervous, Snare. I'm not here to capture you, the intruder said, and didn't do anything aside from the water barriers. Then why did Princess Sally stop me? Snare leaned against a tree trunk as he appraised Sally, who was standing on a thin branch of a tree, with a wary expression. The person who had suddenly appeared was none other than Sally, who had been in the limelight recently, and had been hailed as the future elven queen of the Wind Forest. Snare naturally kept a respectful distance away from this popular figure of Helena's. He hadn't heard about her persecution of the night elves, but he knew that Helena was definitely going to find someone she could control to become the princess of the elven race. Now that she had appeared here and stopped him, he had already given up all hope that he would be able to leave safely. She was too powerful, and he was no match for her. She was able to progress to the 8th tier at such a young age, and even though she was still slightly inferior to the princess, she was still quite a prodigy. Helena had chosen her for a reason. There was no other elf as exceptional as her among the younger generation of the Wind Forest. Sally looked at Snare, and said in a calm voice, "I'm here to tell you that Helena left a contingency plan before she left. If you do anything during this period of time, you'll definitely run afoul of Helena's arrangements. I hope you can stay calm." A hint of surprise flashed through Snare's eyes, but he was still appraising Sally with a wary expression. "Why are you telling me this?" Sally looked into his eyes and replied, "Because I'm also an elf." Snare could see the pain and conflict in her eyes in that instant, and he seemed to have understood what she was thinking. He nodded and said, "Thank you. Let me give you a piece of advice. Don't trust anyone. There are no friends that you can't betray for the sake of your own interests." Sally's expression quickly returned to normal as she spoke in an indifferent voice. At the same time, She withdrew the water barriers in all directions. "Thank you." Snare expressed his gratitude again, before taking a final glance at Sally. He then put on his hat and leaped down from the tree, disappearing into the forest in the blink of an eye. "Am I doing the right thing?" Sally murmured to herself as she stood on the treetop and looked at the vast forest. No one answered her. There was only the sound of the wind blowing through the forest. The Grand Peace Conference officially opened under the auspices of Michael. In the past 100 years, the rulers of all the races on the Norland continent had never gathered together like today. The scale of the conference was truly the highest. However, in the past 100 years, there had been some conflicts of interest between the various races. There were even neighbors who had been fighting for 100 years. There were new and old grudges, and the atmosphere was not harmonious. There were even some who were at daggers drawn. The appearance of Crassus and Julian at Chaos City's seats also shocked all the other representatives. Although everyone knew that the two of them had been staying in Chaos City recently, given their personalities, they naturally wouldn't join any side casually, especially the Crassus. Their status in the Roth Empire was even higher than Alex's. However, today both Alex and Crassus were standing on Chaos City's side. It was really a little magical. Michael started off by talking about the benefits that the various races had brought to the people in the past 100 years of peace. He also talked about how the various races had cooperated and made some breakthroughs and changes, and the results were remarkable. These words made Meg sleepy. Luckily, the forest troll representative sitting next to him was really an idiot. The way he sat next to him was too weird, and helped him relieve a lot of his tiredness. To put it bluntly, today's peace conference was a negotiation between the peace-loving party and the pro-war party. The peace-loving party had already formed a peace alliance with great momentum. Meanwhile, the pro-war party led by the Roth Empire was fighting their own battles. The demons had already fallen apart, and were no longer a concern. The rest was between the Roth Empire and the Peace Alliance. As for the orcs, Oster couldn't even deal with Connie now. He had to bring all the powerhouses with him to protect himself whenever he went out. Now, half of the Twilight Forest was in a state where there were no powerhouses protecting it, and no one in charge. The elves were in a similar situation. He and Irina had stirred things up, liberated a large batch of elven slaves, and even established the Night Elves. It was a devastating blow to the social structure of the Wind Forest. Meanwhile, Snare and a group of like-minded elves were still dividing the elves. Just these things alone were enough to give Helena a headache. How could she have the energy to talk about war? The peace treaty signed back then ended the racial wars on the Norland continent and ushered in a period of peaceful development. 100 years have passed, and all the races agreed to hold a peace conference 100 years later to renew the peace treaty. Michael paused for a moment. He looked at the representatives of the various races present and said, "Everyone is here today to fulfill the 100-year promise. Regarding this, you can all give your opinions. We will discuss it thoroughly and make a wise decision for the Norland continent. There's no point in fighting. The peace treaty is a good one. We dwarves are willing to renew it," the king of the dwarves said straightforwardly. "We goblins also support the renewal of the peace treaty. There will be no winners if the racial wars are to resume," the goblin chief chimed in. "Orcs will never be slaves," Connie shouted as she stood up. She looked at the strange expressions on everyone's faces and swallowed before shrinking back. She lowered her voice and said, "We also support the renewal of the peace treaty." Oster wanted to stand up. However, Meg glanced at him. Oster immediately sat down again. His Adam's apple rolled, but he didn't dare to stand up in the end. Michael stood up again. He looked at everyone and solemnly said, "I represent Chaos City to make a statement. Chaos City was born because of peace. After all the races signed the peace treaty here and built the Batai prison, it slowly developed into a city that accommodates all the races and allows them to coexist peacefully. We will always stand on the side of peace. At the same time, we also hope that all the races can support the peace treaty. War will only make all the races pay a terrible price, and it will be a devastating disaster for the ordinary people. Our enemy now is the devil. From the murals, War might increase the devil's power. That is a terrifying existence that can destroy all the races. We should work together to find the devil that escaped from the seal it again, and find a way to kill it permanently. We, the giant dragons, support Chaos City's approach. The most important thing now is to find the devil that disappeared. Once it regains its power, or unseals more devils, it will be a disaster for the Norland continent. Douglas also stood up slowly and coldly said, "Don't forget that day at the Thunderstorm Mountains. We only faced half of the devil that was sealed, and we almost paid a terrible price to seal it again." "I object." Right at this moment, a calm voice sounded. Chapter 1950. Andre stood up slowly and calmly said to everyone, 100 years have passed, and the Norland continent now is different from before. The peace treaty that was drafted back then is no longer applicable. The Roth Empire requests to redistribute the territories according to each race's power. The various representatives had different expressions when they heard that, and no one said anything for a while. Meg looked at Andre and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. If one were to judge Andre from a historical point of view, he would definitely be considered a wise ruler. During his 30-odd years on the throne, the Roth Empire was prosperous, and its people were at peace. Their national power had increased rapidly, and they had trained their soldiers and trained their horses. They had also nurtured a large number of powerful magic casters. On top of that, he was also an ambitious ruler. He kept a low profile, and waited for the right time to fight for more territories and living space for the Roth Empire and the human race during the peace treaty. During the racial war back then, the human race had paid a terrible price before they finally obtained the right to sit in the peace treaty. However, because they were weak, they obtained a piece of barren land in the end. It was the human race who used their own hands to turn that barren land into fertile farmland and built many cities. Given the human race's current rate of reproduction, the Roth Empire's current territory was indeed not enough. Given his current power, it seemed reasonable for him to request for more territory. If that was the case, Meg might not stop the human race from expanding. That was reasonable. However, Andre wasn't someone who would be satisfied with just having enough land for the human race to thrive. What he wanted was for the world to bow down to him. If he wanted too much, he would naturally cross the bottom line of the various races, and the war between races would start again. Louis looked at Andre with a frown and said, "Andre, the most urgent thing now is to resolve the threat from the devil. As for the redistribution of the territories, we can discuss it later. First, we have to let the various races of the Norland continent let down their guard and really work together. To the Roth Empire, the most urgent thing now is to redistribute the territories." Andre looked at Louis with a mocking smile. "To you giant dragons, 100 years is just a blink of an eye. You were the ones who signed the contract back then, and you are still the ones sitting here now. You can wait, but I can't. After another 100 years, it's hard to say if the Roth Empire will still exist in this world. I'm not signing this contract." Andre's forceful and reasonable request caused the entire hall to fall silent. As expected, the older the ginger, the spicier it is. Meg looked at Andre with a serious expression. Louis was stumped by Andre's words. For a moment, he didn't know how to retort. He was indeed present at the peace conference 100 years ago, and he was also one of the people who drafted the treaty. There were many familiar faces among the representatives of the various races present today, such as the King of the Dwarves, the Goblin Chief, and Helena. If Bruno hadn't been killed by Alex yesterday, he would be sitting here now. It was he who signed the contract as the Forest Troll's representative. The lifespan of a human was too short. A few decades would pass in the blink of an eye for a giant dragon, but for a human, it might be the length of a complete life. The King of the Roth Empire, who had signed the agreement on behalf of the humans, was already Andre's ancestor. Andre might already be dead in 50 years, let alone 100 years. It was reasonable for Andre to refuse to sign the contract. None of the representatives were in a hurry to speak. They were afraid that Andre and his Roth Empire would set their eyes on their territory. "So you're planning to restart the racial war?" Mag asked Andre, He didn't keep quiet anymore. No, this is not my choice. Andre looked at Mag and said, all I want is a piece of land where my citizens can thrive. There are still many pieces of land like this on the Norland continent that have been abandoned. What the Roth Empire wants isn't much, and it's not too much. You know very well that no race will give their land to you. Aren't you trying to snatch the land from the other races by saying this? Douglas said coldly, I'm not ambitious, and I don't want the land of the other races. I only want half of the land that has been abandoned by the dragons, Andre said calmly. I think you're dreaming. How dare you set your sights on the giant dragons? Isaiah the Tyrannosaurus dragon roared angrily as he glared at Andre with his bell-sized eyes. The land under Dragon Island is all abandoned. Back then, the giant dragons occupied Dragon Island and took the most fertile land on the Norland continent for themselves. If the giant dragons really want to form an alliance with the Roth Empire to fight against the devils, why won't you give up a piece of land that's useless to you? Andre asked with a smile. What if we don't agree? Lewis said in a low voice. Then I can only expand outwards in order to let more of my people survive. As for whether it's to the west, east, or south, I can't be sure, and I won't make any guarantees. Andre was still smiling. The orcs' representatives who were in the northwest of the Roth Empire's capital changed their expressions. Helena frowned. The Wind Forest was in the east of the Roth Empire. The three giant dragons also frowned. Andre's threat was very obvious. The Roth Empire couldn't possibly attack Dragon Island, so he stated his target very clearly. Regardless of what the colossal dragon tribe says, I'll just attack the other tribes next to me. It was a barbaric yet effective method. I think you should know that the giant dragons, goblins, dwarves, orcs, 108 tribes, Chaos City, night elves, and other races and forces have formed a peace alliance yesterday. Once you attack the allies of the peace alliance, the Roth Empire will have to face the peace alliance, and not one of your neighbors, Michael said in a low voice. That won't affect any of my decisions, Andre replied calmly. Andre, do you really want to make the whole world your enemy? Is your Roth Empire really so powerful that it can stand against the whole world? How arrogant. Lewis said. From the fact that you can't wait to form the so-called peace alliance, the current Roth Empire does indeed have the capital to do so. Andre nodded as he looked at the representatives of the various races with a mocking expression. So, what makes you think that an empire that requires all of you to unite against should continue to hole up in the most barren land on the Norland continent, and allow all of you to continue reaping the fruits of your labor? Who's the arrogant one? Brilliant. Even Meg couldn't help but want to give Andre's speech a thumbs up. His logic was flawless. Chapter 1951. Andre spoke wittily, showing the demeanor of a great diplomat. It almost made people forget that he was the emperor of the Roth Empire, one of the most powerful men in the world. He cleverly used the need for territory to rationalize the war. Furthermore, this need was not from his inner desire to expand, but from the citizens of the Roth Empire. It was the urgent need of all humans for survival. Survival was the bottom line for all races. And just like what Andre said, the humans were weak back then, and were given the most barren piece of land. 100 years had passed, and the Roth Empire was no longer the weak country it used to be. As a powerful empire that had grown in power, they reasonably requested to expand their territory during the peace conference. Furthermore, he challenged the giant dragons. He wanted the most fertile piece of land on the Norland continent that had been abandoned by the giant dragons. Meg looked at Andre with a slight frown. This wily old fox was super smart. Josh and Sean were not even worth mentioning in front of him. Oster frowned and wanted to say something, but stopped. Why? You can't beat the giant dragons, so you're taking it out on us orcs? Helena, on the other hand, was looking at Andre with a scrutinizing gaze, as if she was trying to determine if he was telling the truth. Because of Andre's words, the negotiation came to a standstill. The giant dragons would not give up their territory easily, even if it was a piece of land that they looked down on and would not use. Of course, the more important reason was that the Roth Empire, which had obtained a barren piece of land, had the right to challenge the giant dragons after a short 100 years of development. If they were given another piece of fertile land, would the Roth Empire surpass the giant dragons 100 years later? This was a question that was very worth pondering. There were only two choices now. The giant dragons would give up half of their territory to the Roth Empire, and Andre would sign the peace treaty to continue the peace for another 100 years. Or, the giant dragons would refuse to give up their territory, and Andre would start a war with the orcs and elves to snatch the disciples he needed. The sharpest question was thrown to the giant dragons. I agree with part of what Andre said about the territory. The humans were weak back then, and according to the division of power, they got the most barren piece of land. The reason why they had agreed to renew the peace treaty 100 years ago was to adapt to the changes. For example, in the past 100 years, the Roth Empire had become a powerful race. Since it was reasonable to divide the territories according to strength back then, 100 years later, when the peace treaty expired, they could divide the territories according to strength again. This way, they could avoid the step of racial wars. As for the vast territory that stretched from Chaos City all the way to the boundless sea realm in the south, it was the land that occupied the most land on the Norland continent. It was the land with the richest and most fertile resources. However, after the giant dragons obtained it, they didn't make any use of it. With the Roth Empire's current power, I think it's reasonable to ask the giant dragons to give a portion of this territory to the Roth Empire, Meg suddenly said. The various representatives looked at Meg in shock. Everyone knew that Alex and Andre had a deep feud, regardless of whether it was the ambush on that rainy night, or her slicing off one of Josh's ears and one of Sean's arms. She had done things that put the Roth Empire on the spot. Who would have thought that he would stand out now and agree with Andre's suggestion? Lewis and Douglas looked at each other. Both of them wanted to know the reason why Alex had changed his mind at the last minute. Even Andre was looking at Meg with a hint of surprise in his eyes. However, Meg turned to Andre and continued, "The peace alliance is not a verbal alliance. In order to protect the world's peace, we have already signed an alliance treaty. If the Roth Empire attacks any race that joins the peace alliance, the peace alliance will attack the Roth Empire." He knew very well that Andre didn't just want the giant dragons half of the territory. There were indeed many citizens in the Roth Empire who were struggling to survive. They couldn't even feed themselves because they didn't have enough land. Andre obviously saw through Meg's thoughts, and his face gradually darkened. "I will never agree to it. The colossal dragons will never be threatened by anyone," Isaiah shouted. Douglas also said with a cold face, "This concerns the interests of the entire giant dragon tribe. Even the 10 giant dragon tribes can't make a decision so easily. We will discuss this later. This also concerns whether the Roth Empire will sign the peace treaty. Since you want to discuss it, I will wait for you to finish before we continue." Andre didn't give in either. Seeing that the conference was going to enter a stalemate again, Michael stood up and said, "In that case, let's adjourn the meeting for now. We will continue the meeting in an hour." Meg didn't expect the adjournment on the first day of the peace conference to come so quickly. Everyone left, and the representatives of the 10 giant dragon tribes went to the side hall. After leaving the conference room, Irina asked Meg curiously, "Why did you suddenly change your mind and stand on Andre's side?" "I'm not standing on his side. I'm standing on the side of reason." Meg shook his head. "The Roth Empire created a miracle in the barren land, but this doesn't mean that they should stay in the barren land forever. I don't like the attitude of the other races. Andre wants this world to crawl in front of him. He wants to find a reasonable excuse to mobilize his troops, so that he can mobilize his troops for war. This territory belongs to the Roth Empire, and I want to use it to shut Andre's mouth." Irina nodded thoughtfully. Meg's thoughts were deeper than hers. "Master, do you think that fellow will really come and attack us orcs? Should we do some preparation work first?" Connie whispered to Rex with a nervous expression. "I've already made the arrangements," Rex said calmly without any change in his expression. "Master is indeed impressive. However, can we stop him?" Connie was looking forward to it. "No. Rex was rather straightforward. Air. The wind forest can't stop him either. Then that's great. On the other side, the representatives of the giant dragon tribes were also in a heated debate. If half of the land can make Andre work with us to deal with the devils together, I think it's worth it, Louis said. I think so too. This territory is like a piece of chicken rib to us giant dragons. It's tasteless, but it's a pity to throw it away. No dragon will treat the land as their own territory. Douglas nodded in agreement. Wouldn't this make us look like a joke to the other races, if we cede our territory, because of the Roth Empire's threat? Isaiah complained loudly. Chapter 1952. This feeling is indeed not bad. Josh walked out of the Magus Tower. His eyes gradually returned to normal, and a mysterious smile appeared on his face. This is just the tip of the iceberg. As long as you can start a war, your power will continue to increase. When that time comes, no one in this world will be a match for you. The devil's low voice sounded in his mind. Next, I am going to the Ministry of War, Josh ordered the coachman as he boarded the horse-drawn carriage. Not long after, a few urgent letters were sent from the Ministry of War to the border, using the fastest falcon. At the same time, a black griffin silently rose from the palace and flew toward the northwestern border. Return to the forest immediately and activate the highest level of combat readiness. Guard against the Roth Empire's invasion, Helena ordered an elf. High Priestess, the Roth Empire is our friend. They have established a peace alliance. Now that the Roth Empire only has us as their friend, they can't possibly attack us, right? That elf asked perplexedly. There are no eternal friends in this world. Don't expect a sly fox like Andre to keep his word, Helena said coldly. Yes, I will return to the forest immediately. That elf's expression turned serious, and he quickly left. The Wind Forest had spent most of its energy on the goblins in recent years, and had almost no defenses against the Roth Empire. If the Roth Empire really attacked the Wind Forest, it would undoubtedly be a disaster. Of course, that elf still didn't believe that the Roth Empire would attack their friendly friend. I'm afraid the giant dragons won't give up their territory so easily. They are famous for being stingy. How can they give their territory away? Michael said to Meg, who he had invited to his study. If the Roth Empire only wants this piece of territory, their request is actually not too much. They can sign the peace treaty reasonably and peacefully, and let the Norland continent enjoy another 100 years of peace. The giant dragons are still the same giant dragons, but the Roth Empire is no longer the weak country it used to be. They have to face all of this seriously. If Crassus and I had stood behind Andre in today's peace conference, the contrast would have been even more obvious. Meg shook his head slightly. Michael nodded in agreement. Yes, if the two of you had stood behind Andre instead of opposing him, he would have had more confidence. I want to know Chaos City's attitude. If the Roth Empire attacks the orcs, will you send reinforcements? Meg asked as he looked into Michael's eyes. Of course. Michael nodded seriously. All right. Meg nodded slightly. Father, I'm afraid that the colossal dragon tribe will not agree to our request so easily. If they don't agree, we'll have a reason to start a war. If the giant dragons would agree so easily, why would I make such a request? Andre looked at Sean with a smile. Sean looked pensive. He hesitated for a moment before asking, how does Father plan to deal with Alex? No matter how strong Alex is, he's still just one person. We don't have to care about him. Andre's smile was filled with confidence. But he's much stronger now than he was 3 years ago. If we leave him alone, he'll be a huge threat to us. Sean thought about how Alex broke through the blockade of 6 10th-tier powerhouses, easily killed his way to him, and then broke his arm. His face was still slightly pale. He's become stronger and sly. It's impossible to ambush him like we did 3 years ago. Since that's the case, why don't we just let him be? Given his character, he'll appear in front of the army sooner or later. When that time comes, Andre's lips curled into a cold smile. The 1-hour intermission passed very quickly. However, due to the huge disagreement within the giant dragons, Andre's conditions could not be reached. and the meeting fell into an anxious wrangling again. Meg had already expected this. The giant dragons were not afraid of the Roth Empire. At least, the Roth Empire was still far from being a threat to the Dragon Island in the sky. However, the existence of the Great Old One made the giant dragons feel a fatal threat. Above the giant dragons, there was an existence with terrifying power, and this existence was filled with malice towards this world. The half of the Great Old One in the Thunderstorm Mountains made them deeply feel this difference. That was the difference when they used to look down on the ants on the ground. It was just that they had become ants now. Hence, the giant dragons took the initiative to ask for cooperation, and even took the initiative to set up a peace alliance with the other races. Meanwhile, Andre, who had a generous personality, did not put the Great Old One in the first place at all. Instead, he used it as one of the bargaining chips in the negotiation. Once the Roth Empire started a war, it would definitely sweep across the Norland continent. If the Great Old One appeared then, the Norland continent would face the awkward situation of not being able to organize an effective resistance and counterattack. Just like that, the whole morning passed without any results. Dracula yawned and turned to ask Camilla. This kind of meeting is indeed super boring. We can't even get a word in. Can we go to Mamie's for lunch? Mamie's is closed today. Camilla shook her head. Ah, what a sad piece of news. Dracula sighed. Meg took advantage of the lunch break to go home, to cook for Amy and before returning to the city lord's castle. This was a power struggle between the Roth Empire and the giant dragons. His influence was limited. Now it was a matter of who would compromise first. The negotiations in the afternoon fell into a stalemate again. The various races in the Peace Alliance all came down to express their support for the giant dragons and the orcs. However, Andre still refused to budge and insisted on half of the giant dragon's territory. Just when everyone thought that today's negotiations would come to an end, an urgent secret letter was delivered to the leaders of the various races present. Bastard! Andre, you old man, you actually launched a sneak attack. Oster slammed the table and stood up, glaring at Andre with bloodshot eyes. His hand that was holding the secret letter was trembling. Andre frowned slightly, as if he did not understand the reason for Oster's anger. Sean handed a military report that he had just received to Andre with a complicated expression, and softly said, "An urgent letter from the Northwest Border Army. The 36 orc tribes have been taken down." Andre's frown deepened. He took the secret letter and scanned it quickly. His face darkened. Helena also stood up with a dark expression, and coldly shouted, "Andre, the elves have been on good terms with the Roth Empire for hundreds of years. Why did you send troops to invade the Wind Forest?" Chapter 1953. There was an uproar at the meeting, and the various representatives couldn't hide their shock. The peace talks hadn't ended yet, and the Roth Empire actually attacked the orcs and elves at the same time without any warning. The orcs and the Roth Empire had been at odds for a long time, so it was understandable that they would be attacked. However, the elves and the Roth Empire had been on good terms for generations, and they had even formed an alliance during the racial war. The Roth Empire suddenly attacked the elves, and everyone couldn't understand what Andre was planning. What the hell is this? Meg was also shocked. He didn't expect Andre to let the army attack the orcs and elves on the first day of the peace talks, and he was still sitting here. This bastard. The elves didn't put up any defenses against the Roth Empire all these years. Now that they suddenly attacked, I'm afraid the Wind Forest will fall soon. Irina's expression also darkened. The night elves could mess around, but it was still the elves' business. However, it was different now that the Roth Empire had invaded. This concerned the survival of the elves. "Master, what should we do now?" Connie had also received the urgent report. The tribes near the Roth Empire's borders had all been conquered, and they were advancing west quickly. The orcs had no one to organize them now, so they couldn't form a large-scale resistance. They were retreating quickly. If Andre doesn't withdraw the army, we will have to go back immediately. Rex's expression was also a little dark. "Andre, what are you doing?" Louis shouted at Andre. There are still 10 days before the peace treaty expires. Do you want to break the rules that were set back then? Andre's expression quickly recovered from the momentary shock. He looked at Louis and calmly said, "Since you are still not making a decision, the Roth Empire will show you our determination. We can do anything to survive. The elves are at fault for what happened today. Andre, if you don't give the order to withdraw the army, the elves will become sworn enemies with the Roth Empire," Helena said resolutely to Andre. "You should tell this to the colossal dragon tribe. We only want half of the territory that they don't need. If they really had the slightest bit of determination to form an alliance with you and fight against the demons together, they wouldn't be so stingy on such matters." Andre sneered. "As long as we get the territory, we will immediately withdraw from the Twilight Forest and the Wind Forest. Don't even think about threatening the giant dragon race. You will regret it." Isaiah glared at Andre. "I've only ever done my job. I don't waste my breath arguing." Andre looked at Isaiah calmly. "Your giant dragon tribe is the one who caused the elves and beastmen to fall to this state." Helena left in a huff. Right now, she needed to return to the Wind Forest to take charge of the defense and expel all the invaders from the Wind Forest. The crisis that the elves were facing right now was comparable to the crisis that had occurred during the war between species. "Andre, we beastmen will let you taste the bitter fruit of our invasion." Oster also left hurriedly with his 5 10th-tier powerhouses. Many of the orc tribes under his control had already fallen. Without a 10th-tier powerhouse to guard and command, the orc tribes would be destroyed with just a touch. "Andre, you'd better consider whether you want to have a long and drawn-out war with the orcs." Lex stood up and looked at Andre with a deep gaze. Then, she looked at the representatives and the chiefs of the various tribes and said, "Everyone, now is the time to test whether the Peace Alliance is a stable organization and not a paper tiger. The 108 tribes of the orc race need your support." Meg stood up and calmly said, "I will go to the Twilight Forest with you all." "We will go too." Dexter also stood up with a firm tone. Michael also stood up with a solemn expression and said, "As a member of the Peace Alliance, Chaos City will stand firmly on the orcs' side and maintain world peace. The goblins are willing to send an elite troop to reinforce the Twilight Forest," the goblin chief said. "The dwarves will provide the alliance with the best weapons and equipment, as well as stable supplies and fortifications," the king of the dwarves said in a low voice. "Andre, I order you all to leave the Twilight Forest immediately. Otherwise, the giant dragons will attack the Roth Empire." Louis said to Andre in a low voice. The members of the Peace Alliance expressed their stance one after another. The War Alliance against the Roth Empire had already been formed. Sean and the powerhouses of the Roth Empire had a slight change in expression. Obviously, they didn't expect the situation to take a turn for the worse. It was going in a direction that no one wanted to see. The demons and forest trolls were just watching from the sidelines. They were just there to watch the show. "Threats are useless to me. Even if all of you attack together, the Roth Empire can still wipe out 2 or 3 of your tribes and destroy half of the giant dragons." Andre didn't avoid or retreat. He looked straight at Louis. "I wonder if all of you are ready to pay such a price. After paying such a price, are you still able to fight that devil? I will give all of you 3 days to think about it. Come and talk to me again after you have made up your mind." Andre stood up and strode towards the door. The powerhouses of the Roth Empire stood guard around him as they followed him with wary expressions. "Aren't you worried that you won't be able to walk out of this door?" Meg's voice sounded from behind. "Since I can take down the Twilight Forest and the Wind Forest here, what's the use of keeping me here other than making the Empire's cavalry even crazier?" Andre stopped in his tracks and turned back to look at Alex with a mischievous smile. "Alex, you should know very well how scary the crazy Empire's cavalry is. If you keep me here, Chaos City will be gone. You will push the Roth Empire into the endless abyss for your own selfish desires," Meg said with a frown. "Humans climbed up step by step from the abyss. We are not afraid of going back into the abyss, but we will be the final victors." Andre looked deeply at Meg before turning to leave. Although there were dozens of 10th-tier powerhouses sitting in the hall, None of them made a move in the end. Meg retracted his gaze and said to Connie, "Let's go. I will go to the Twilight Forest with all of you." "Okay." Connie quickly nodded. Of course, he couldn't reject such a top superstar. "I will make a trip to the Wind Forest," Irina said in Meg's ear. Golden light lit up under her feet, and she disappeared from the hall in the blink of an eye. "I hope everyone can fulfill their promise." Meg glanced at the various powerhouses present, and went out with Connie and Rex. Dexter got up and followed them out. Chapter 1954. Big Brother, the Roth Empire's army is coming from the east. They're only about 25 kilometers away from our tribe. The Sela tribe has already been breached and burned. Many people must have died. Haebang ran up the stone wall with sweat all over his forehead. He looked at Haga, who was looking into the distance, and angrily said, "They've gone too far. Let's fight them. Don't be impatient. Pass down my orders. Send all the bows and arrows in the tribe to the city wall. Get the best hunters to go to the city wall, and get the others to carry rocks up," Haga calmly ordered. The Crow tribe was located in the middle of the Twilight Forest. The tribe was built halfway up a mountain, with a steep peak at its back and steep cliffs on both sides. Only the front of the tribe had a rugged mountain path that led down the mountain. It was not suitable for large groups to pass through. Furthermore, they had built a 5-meter-tall stone wall on this side. As a medium-sized tribe, the Crow tribe had more than 5,000 orcs. Apart from the elderly and children, there were more than 3,000 of them who could fight. In the orc tribe, the women's fighting ability was never inferior to the men's. As the eldest son of the chief, Haga was the expected next chief of the Wu Tua tribe. He had already taken over the various affairs of the tribe under his father's guidance, and was currently the actual ruler of the Wu Tua tribe. This was also the reason why the two brothers had not gone to Amy's for a long time. Recently, the factions of Oster and Connie in the Twilight Forest were in conflict. The factions of War and Peace were at loggerheads. As the leader of the Crow tribe, Haga had to stay in the tribe to deal with any possible incidents. The Crow tribe chose to stand on the side of peace. As a small and medium-sized tribe, peace had brought stability to the Crow tribe, and they would not repeat the mistake of being cannon fodder. A few days ago, Connie had sent a messenger to deliver a secret letter to them, warning them to be careful of the Roth Empire's attack. Haga then recalled all the orcs in the tribe, and cancelled all hunting activities. He left the most elite and powerful hunters in the tribe to protect the tribe. Haebang had not cared about this at first. He thought that the Roth Empire would not attack the orcs before the peace conference ended, much less attack the Crow tribe in the middle of the Twilight Forest. In the past few years, the orc tribes at the borders had been fighting with the Roth Empire's border army. They had even pillaged the Roth Empire's villages and towns. But the Roth Empire had never dared to attack the Twilight Forest. However, no one would have thought that the Roth Empire would launch a sudden attack on the Twilight Forest on the first day of the peace talks. Furthermore, they destroyed several large tribes at the border with ease. They were like a sharp knife that pierced into the Twilight Forest and slashed downwards rapidly, as if they were going to split the entire forest into two. Coincidentally, the Udo tribe was in the path of an invading Roth Empire cavalry, and the Sela tribe in front of them had already been conquered. It was a medium-sized tribe with more than 10,000 beastmen, and it was even more powerful than the Wu Tua tribe. However, it had only been an hour since they had been attacked, broken through and abandoned. The Roth Empire's cavalry was like a swarm of locusts. After destroying one tribe, they immediately rushed to the next target. The Crow Tua tribe had nowhere to run. As proud beastmen, they naturally would not surrender. Haha. An old orc that was old but still muscular walked up to the city wall. "Father." Haha looked at Tysil as he took 2 steps forward, and said, "The Sela tribe has already been conquered. The Roth Empire's army is coming straight for us. I have already asked the Fok tribe for help. We plan to defend based on the terrain advantage, and wait for the reinforcements to arrive." "I have already heard from Haebang." Tysil nodded as he looked at his calm son with gratification. If he were Haha's age, he would have rashly led the tribe's warriors down the mountain to fight the Roth Empire's army to the death. Haha walked closer to Tysil and lowered his voice as he said, "The enemy is very strong. They are much stronger than we expected." Tysil looked into Haha's eyes and said, "It is not scary that the enemy is strong. As long as we have the will to fight, we will be able to defeat all enemies." Haha nodded solemnly with high fighting spirit in his eyes. Over 10 trebuchets were already in place. The huge rocks that were splashed with beast oil were glowing under the sun as they were aimed at the sky. The tribe's best hunters were standing on the city wall with longbows in their hands. They were the best marksmen in the tribe. The orcs lined up to carry the huge rocks up the city wall one by one and piled them up into small hills. The ancestors of the Wu Tua tribe had already proven this countless times. Standing on the high city wall and relying on the mountainous terrain, the huge rocks pushed down by the children were more troublesome than the arrows shot by the marksmen. Not long after, the ground began to tremble slightly. Shouts and the sound of horses' hooves could be heard from the canyon far away. "Prepare for battle," Haha roared as he stood on the city wall. He took out the huge bow on his back and knocked a spear-like arrow on the bowstring, aiming it at the canyon below. Thousands of archers also knocked their arrows on their bowstrings at the same time and stared in the direction of the canyon. The orcs beside the trebuchets looked at Haha, waiting for his orders. Below the city wall, thousands of orcs were holding big knives, stone clubs and javelins, waiting in formation. Further back were the children and elderly. They were also looking in the direction of the city wall with serious expressions and did not show any fear. The first thing that appeared in the vision of the Wu Tua tribe was the hundreds of flying cavalrymen. They flew towards the Wu Tua tribe in a black mass. The wingspan of an eagle mount was usually 3 to 5 meters. Other than a pair of sharp claws, it did not have any other special abilities. Its speed, agility, and strength were not considered strong among the first-tier magic beasts, and it could only carry one person. However, it was a first-tier magic beast that was very easy to tame, so it was one of the most popular flying mounts in the Roth Empire's army. Every army had their own flying eagle squadron. The power of the knights was at least 4th tier. Whether it was diving, stabbing, or directly landing in the enemy's camp, they could cause a lot of trouble. "It's just a small tribe. Brothers, let's take them down directly so that our brothers below don't have to climb the mountain." The leader of this flying eagle squadron was Barrow, a tall middle-aged man. He looked at the Wu Tua tribe that was halfway up the mountain and laughed with disdain. "Kill." There was a burst of laughter from the flying group. Ever since they entered the Twilight Forest, they had not met any effective resistance. Even they were a little surprised that these strong-looking orcs were so weak. The last orc tribe that they had wiped out was much bigger than this one. But their flying eagle squadron only needed to dive a few times to break the will of that tribe. Together with the Empire's cavalry, that tribe was quickly flattened. This tribe looked even more vulnerable. The cavalrymen on the backs of the eagles had sinister smiles on their faces. They were already thinking about how they could choose a few beautiful female orcs to enjoy before the cavalrymen arrived. 500 meters, 300 meters, 200 meters, 100 meters. Release! A thunderous roar was heard. Whistling fireballs and a sky full of arrows suddenly flew from the top of the city wall and flew towards the flying eagle squadron that was diving down. Chapter 1955. The fireball dragged a long tail behind it, and the arrows were coated in green poison. When the steelback eagles were less than 100 meters away, the fireball met them head-on. "Kill!" Barrow drew his sword and looked at the rain of arrows. Although he was a little afraid, retreating now would only make him a target. Furthermore, the glory of an imperial knight made it impossible for him to retreat on the battlefield. "Kill!" All the knights drew their swords and roared in unison. Bang! When the fireball hit the steel riding eagle, it directly smashed a bloody hole in the body of the steel riding eagle. Together with the steel riding eagle fell from the sky and was badly mutilated. Puff, puff, puff. The poison arrows pierced the eyes and bodies of the steelback eagles. The hundreds of large steelback eagles became the best targets in the sky. In the blink of an eye, the menacing steelback eagles fell from the sky like dumplings. Screams, wails, wails resounded in the sky above the Utopia tribe. Barrow's heart was bleeding. It was only the first wave of attacks. But because of the unexpected ambush, the flying regiment had lost 2/3 of its members. The knights who had lost their mounts and fell from the sky were dizzy from the fall. Before they could react, they were hacked to death by the orcs that swarmed forward. "Break their formation!" Barrow roared. He led the rest of the flying cavalrymen to charge downwards. The steelback eagles could cover a distance of 30 meters in less than a breath's time. He wanted to slaughter the entire tribe as a sacrifice to his brothers. "Spear team!" After a round of arrows, Haga roared as he drew his bow and fired again. Hundreds of strong men holding 5-meter-long spears appeared behind the archers. The sharp tips of the spears were pointed at 45 degrees to the sky, facing the steelback flying regiment that had taken the first volley of arrows. "Careful!" Barrow looked at the silver spears that suddenly rose from the city wall, and was shocked. He pulled on the reins to change the flying position of the steelback eagles as he shouted. However, not everyone had Barrow's reaction speed. One by one, the ironback eagles were unable to dodge in time, and directly crashed into the slanted spears. The 5-meter-long spear pierced through the ironback eagle's body, skewering it and the knight on its back. Blood splattered all over the city wall, creating a bloody and spectacular scene. "Retreat! Retreat!" Barrow shouted in panic as he rode the ironback eagle into the sky. This was the first time they had encountered such a powerful and terrifying counterattack in today's battle. The other party seemed to know their fighting style, and used efficient and terrifying methods to deal the greatest amount of damage to them. Although he was a level 7 knight, he only had 20 to 30 subordinates left. Moreover, the other party had orcs of a higher level. Retreating was the only choice, and also the wisest choice. Hundreds of ironback eagle riders charged over. But in the blink of an eye, only a few dozen ironback eagles were left, fleeing in panic. Fire! But at this moment, the second round of attacks from the orcs began. Hundreds of sharpshooters aimed at the 20 to 30 ironback eagles. But in the end, only 3 ironback eagles managed to escape with arrows. They wobbled as they flew towards the valley. The cavalry regiment that rushed out of the canyon just happened to see the flying group of ironback eagles charging towards the orc tribe halfway up the mountain. The expected crushing situation did not happen, but they saw the ironback eagles falling down like dumplings. Then they inexplicably crashed into the city wall, and many of them were nailed to death. In the end, they fled in panic, and only 3 ironback eagles escaped the range of the arrows. How could this be? The cavalry stared with wide eyes, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. In the previous battles where they had attacked other orc tribes, even the larger ones, the ironback eagles had been able to cause a lot of casualties and internal chaos. "We won!" Haebang shouted excitedly, clenching his fists. The other orcs also cheered. This was a battle that was destined to be recorded in the annals of the Utopia tribe. Clean up the battlefield and drag the ironback eagles from the city wall back to the tribe. They are very good food. Haga put down his bow. His expression was still calm. He did not feel smug about the battle that he had just led. This is only the vanguard of the Roth Empire, and only one of the vanguard units. We will be attacked even more fiercely. The number of enemies is very large. I need everyone to stand up and fight to protect our home and our families. Haga shouted, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" The orcs clenched their fists and shouted. About 30,000 cavalrymen passed through the valley and headed straight for the Utopia tribe. An entire ironback eagle squadron was almost wiped out. This was a huge insult to the warriors of the Roth Empire. They wanted this tribe, which was only marked as a small dot on the map, to be wiped out forever, just like the other tribes. The catapults were set up again. The archers stroked their longbows as they stood on the city wall, and watched the Roth Empire's cavalrymen get closer and closer. The spearmen put their spears aside, and stood in front of a pile of huge rocks. Meanwhile, the other orcs had already prepared all the support work below the city wall. This included moving the huge rocks up the city wall, filling in the gaps of their fallen tribesmen, and engaging in close combat after the enemy breached the city wall. "Barrow, what's going on?" A middle-aged general in armor asked Barrow, who had been shot in the shoulder and was receiving treatment from the medics. Barrow's face was pale. Charlie was a deputy general of the Northwestern Allied Army. He was an experienced general and also a powerful ninth-tier knight. This time, the military had suddenly given the order to launch a thunderous operation against the orcs. He was leading an army of 30,000 cavalrymen to attack from the middle. Their goal was to break through the entire Twilight Forest and split it apart. As for those orc tribes that had been breached, the order was to kill them all. The orcs were not weak as a whole, but this was because they were united. They had gathered the elites and powerhouses of each tribe in advance to form a powerful orc army. When the orc tribes were fighting on their own, they were unable to withstand a single blow from the large number of well-trained Roth Empire's cavalrymen. However, this small tribe that had been built halfway up the mountain actually wiped out the Ironback Eagle squadron. This was equivalent to destroying their aerial power. Charlie had to take this seriously. "General, the other party is very cunning. We were ambushed. They came prepared, so we suffered heavy losses." Barrow looked at Charlie with an aggrieved expression. Tears were already welling up in his eyes. Chapter 1956. "Father, why did we suddenly attack the orcs and elves at the same time?" Sean asked perplexedly as he followed Andre to the flying steed. Andre's face darkened, and he softly said, "I also want to know who dared to mobilize the army behind my back." "Didn't you give the order?" Sean's expression changed slightly. Andre had absolute control over the Roth Empire's army, and the Empire's marshal was right beside him. If it wasn't Andre who gave the order, who could mobilize the northwestern and southeastern military regions at the same time? "Could it be Josh?" Sean exclaimed. "It's not him." Andre denied Sean's guess almost immediately. "If the Magus Tower controls Rodu, it might have something to do with him. No one else can mobilize the two major military regions apart from me. I'm just guessing. I hope Father doesn't blame me. After all, the only person in Rodu who has the power to do something like this is Josh, and we happen to be in Chaos City." Sean quickly lowered his head. Andre's face darkened when he heard that. He turned to the official beside him and asked, "Is there any news from Rodu?" "Your Majesty, everything is normal in Rodu. There are no abnormalities," that official replied respectfully. "Did Josh send a message?" Andre asked again. "His Highness the Second Prince didn't send a message, but news from Rodu says that he is commanding and maintaining order in Rodu." Andre nodded slightly and continued, "Pass down my orders. The Roth Empire has entered a state of war. We will continue to advance according to the original plan. We will return to Rodu first." "Yes," that official replied. "Your Majesty, can I go directly to the Twilight Forest? If there are problems in the military, I will be held responsible. I hope I can eradicate the problem personally," Dominic said to Andre with a serious expression. The military bypassed him and the Emperor to launch a war against the orcs and elves at the same time. This meant that the Empire's army had gone out of control. As the Empire's marshal, he would be held responsible. He desperately wanted to know who could corrupt the military system and cause such a serious incident. The target this time was the orcs and elves. What if the next target was Rodu? This was something that no ruler could accept. Andre stopped in his tracks and looked at Dominic and said, "I hope you can give me a satisfactory answer." "Yes." Dominic nodded and left quickly. Not long after, a black griffin rose from the city lord's mansion and flew towards the northwest. Following that, flying mounts took off one by one, flying towards the north. "Joshua, you've brought about your own destruction. You've truly surprised me." Sitting on the back of the griffin, Sean sneered. The attack on the beastmen was unrelated to him. It was also not an order from his emperor father. Thus, the only person capable of doing such a thing was Joshua. Even though he was surprised by Joshua's infiltration of the military, and even the Northwestern Military District, under his control, had been mobilized by him. As for Josh's motive, he guessed that he wanted to start a war during the peace conference, so that the various races would attack him and Andre. That way, Josh would naturally become the king of the Roth Empire. However, despite all of Joshua's calculations, he was still one step behind. Although the various races were furious, they did not try to force them to stay. The most powerful powerhouses of the Roth Empire had all followed them to Chaos City this time. Anyone who wanted to touch them would have to consider carefully if it was worth it to fight them to the death for an orc. In the Twilight Forest, in a tribe that had just been massacred, between the broken walls, the flames had yet to be extinguished, and the corpses of orcs were everywhere. Joshua stood on a broken wall with his hair disheveled. He closed his eyes and opened his arms wide. Wisps of black fog rose from the corpses around him, and then surged towards him rapidly. They entered his body, and formed a ball of black fog around his body, making him look even more blurry. What a delicious resentment, a taste that makes one miss it so much, a greedy and crazy voice sounded in Joshua's heart. His lips curled up into a cold smile. After he had absorbed all the black fog, Joshua suddenly opened his eyes. The heavy fog gradually dispersed, and a smear of red flashed across his eyes. His aura suddenly surged crazily. Joshua clenched his fists, and felt a powerful force running amok in his body. This was power, not magic. After absorbing the resentment of the 32 slaughtered tribes, his power began to increase crazily. In terms of power, he should be on par with a 9th tier knight now. As a magic caster, he had directly leaped to the level of a 9th tier knight in just half a day. This made him very happy. There is a huge threshold to go from the 9th tier to the 10th tier. You still need a super large tribe to provide you with resentment. The August tribe with hundreds of thousands of people is a good choice. The devil's voice sounded again. Then I'll choose the August tribe. Joshua grinned, and took out a piece of paper specially used for military secret letters. He wrote 2 lines on it, and then stuffed it into the falcon to send to the frontline military headquarters. I've schemed for so many years, and it's all gone now. What a pity. Joshua looked to the east, and laughed self-deprecatingly. As long as you can slaughter the entire Twilight Forest and absorb all the resentment, you will be able to transcend and become a real powerhouse, which is also your so-called god. When that time comes, the Roth Empire will be yours. The entire Norland continent will be yours. The devil's voice sounded in Joshua's heart. If you want to blame someone, you can only blame Alex for being too strong. Blame my father for being too biased. If I can't have it, then I will destroy it. Since you like war, then I will help you start one. I want to see who will have the last laugh and sit on the throne. Joshua stopped smiling and turned into a cloud of black fog, disappearing into the forest. A messenger rushed into the tent and reported, "Princess, the 5 lines of defense at the northwestern border have been breached. The Roth Empire's army has already entered the Wind Forest. They are unstoppable." What? In the tent, the elves who were discussing the strategy to retreat from the enemy were all shocked when they heard that. Sally also frowned when she heard that, but she remained calm. She looked at the messenger and asked, "What about the Kane's family, the Radner family, and the Stott family?" The territories of these 3 families were located in the northwestern part of the Wind Forest, which was the route of the Roth Empire's invasion. The Kane's family was breached after a fierce battle. The Radner family and the Stott family had already fled south before the enemy came. The messenger reported. No pop-up window. Chapter 1957. What a bunch of bastards! Sally clenched her fists. These cowards had put the Wind Forest in danger. She then asked the elf beside her, "How long more before the guards in the south can retreat?" "It will take another half a day to get them all back to the core area," that elf quickly replied. Sally frowned. "No, that's too slow. Get them to abandon all their supplies and rush back at full speed. Otherwise, the Roth Empire's cavalry would have already flattened the forest by the time they get back. I think we should just surrender. The Roth Empire is too powerful. We are no match for them." Elliot said with a panicked expression. Now that Her Majesty is in seclusion, and High Priestess Helena is not in the forest, how are we going to fight the Roth Empire's army when they attack? Yes, the Roth Empire is too powerful. We elves are no match for them. Princess, why don't you go and talk to the Roth Empire? We will surrender and stop fighting. A few other elves chimed in immediately. Many elves were already panicking when they heard that the Roth Empire's cavalry had attacked the forest. Shut up, Sally shouted coldly. Everyone fell silent. All the elves looked at Sally and swallowed their saliva uncontrollably. The Roth Empire's cavalry has just entered the periphery of the Wind Forest, and you are already in a hurry to surrender. We almost occupied the entire forest back then, but we never gave up. It has only been 100 years. Where is your courage? Where is the backbone you had when you defended this forest to the death? Sally looked at the elves coldly with disappointment in her eyes. You have all shed your blood for this forest. Now that the forest needs you again, are you going to give up this time? All the elves lowered their heads in shame and didn't dare to look at Sally. This princess, who usually appeared to be kind and indifferent, was vaguely resembling Irina's aura and shadow at this moment. The Roth Empire used to be our ally, but from the moment they attacked the Wind Forest, they became our enemy. We can no longer retreat. Sally's voice became colder. If you don't want to become the slaves of the Roth Empire, then show the courage you used to chase the orcs and demons out of the forest. Chase these cavaliers out of the Wind Forest. But Elliot still wanted to say something. Sally looked at Elliot and said coldly, "Those who disturb the morale of the troops will be executed immediately." Elliot swallowed the words he was about to say. Although Sally was his daughter, he didn't think she was joking when he saw her cold expression. Drive the humans out. Chase the Roth Empire out of the forest. All of the elves yelled in unison, and the atmosphere in the tent gradually became more and more lively. Everyone seemed to be able to see some of the expressions on each other's faces during the racial war. I just received news that the High Priestess is already on her way back. I will ask Her Majesty the Queen to see if she can come out of seclusion, Sally continued. I will leave the military deployment to Master Denton. He was the military advisor of the elves during the racial war. I don't care what you think, but all decisions will be made by Master Denton. Anyone who disobeys military orders will be executed. An elderly elf stood up slowly and looked at Sally solemnly. We dare not disobey your orders. Thank you. Sally nodded and turned to leave the tent. Phew. After exiting the tent, Sally heaved a long sigh of relief. She turned around to make sure that no one had followed her out, and only then did she use her hand to fan her burning face. She looked at the sweat on her palm, and a wry smile appeared on her face. As expected, she was still far inferior to Irina. If Irina were here, she would definitely do better than her, right? Will she side with the forest this time? Sally looked to the south, and then hurried towards the Tree of Life. It's a mess. It's completely a mess. This might be a good opportunity for us to revolt. That's right. If we revolt during the chaos, we might be able to win over more friends. The opportunity to overthrow the tyrannical regime is here. The leaders of the Night Elves met again. No, this has to do with the survival of our elven race. The Roth Empire is far more powerful than even the orcs and demons of the past. We can't allow the forest to fall into even greater chaos at a time like this, Snare said with a dark expression. The Wind Forest is now a cage. All the elves have no freedom to speak of. Since that's the case, why don't we just destroy it and rebuild it? Isn't this our wooden floor? An elf looked at Snare with a perplexed expression. Princess Irina once said that no matter how terrible the elven race is, that's our own business. No one else has the right to tell us what to do. Snare shook his head. He looked at the elves and said, I summoned all of you here so urgently to remind you not to have any other ideas at a time like this. Our primary goal is to resist the invasion from the Roth Empire. After chasing the invaders out of the forest, we'll deal with our internal problems. All the elves nodded in agreement in the end. Then will Princess Irina come back this time? Another elf asked. I think so. Snare nodded with certainty. The Wu Tua tribe had almost wiped out the Roth Empire's flying squadron, and the orcs in the tribe were elated. However, there wasn't much joy on Hage's face. Instead, he looked at the Roth Empire's cavalrymen pouring out of the valley with a grave expression. There was a long line of them, and a rough estimate put them at over 30,000. 30,000 well-trained elite cavalrymen, equipped with full-body armor. There was also an unknown number of magic casters accompanying them. It was a characteristic of the Roth Empire's army to have a certain ratio of magic casters. This gave the Roth Empire's cavalrymen, who had only one method of attack, more possibilities. Such a large army most likely had magic casters at least at the 8th tier. In fact, there might be more than one. That would pose a huge threat to the Wu Tuo tribe. Get ready for battle. The enemy is coming again. Hege turned around to look at his tribesmen. This battle will be very difficult. The tribes that have been breached have all been burned. We have to fight with our lives to protect our tribe and tribesmen. Fight! Fight! The orcs' furious roars reverberated throughout the tribe. The location of this tribe is very important. We have to pass through the canyon in front. And if we don't take down this tribe, they can cut off our supply line at any time. Charlie sat on the back of the horse and looked at the tribe that was built halfway up the mountain. The orcs were boorish and arrogant. They were very careless in choosing the location of their tribe and rarely considered the issue of defense. It was very rare to see a tribe like this one. However, this tribe in front of them, regardless of whether it was to avenge the flying squadron or because of its strategic location, meant that they had to take down this tribe. It's just a small tribe. General, give me 2,000 men. I will go and take it down, a general said confidently. Charlie shook his head, his expression grave as he looked at the tribe halfway up the mountain. In a situation where there are no top experts, to be able to wipe out the Steelback Eagle Flight Squad, there must be some experts in defense in this tribe. We can't waste too much time here. Gather all the magic casters to the front line. I will personally lead the attack. Chapter 1958. What's the exact situation in the Twilight Forest now? Meg asked Connie and Rex after they left the City Lord's castle. The Roth Empire's 200,000-strong Northwestern Allied Army has split into 6 groups and launched an attack on the Twilight Forest. All the tribes along the border have fallen, and they have massacred all the tribes that they conquered, Rex said with a grave expression. Did you kill everyone? Meg's face darkened when he heard that. This kind of behavior was even worse than during the racial war. He could not understand why Andre would do that. Killing those innocent orcs would only stir up conflict and the orcs' bloodthirst. It would also arouse the disgust of the other races. There was no benefit in doing so. Yes, Rex nodded. He was also shocked when he received the news. Now all the orc tribes are fighting for themselves. They are vulnerable in front of the Roth Empire's army. We have to rush back as soon as possible and recruit all the tribes to resist the Roth Empire's invasion. Lantist and I will help you. Meg glanced at Dexter, who had followed him out, and whistled. Azzy appeared in the sky, circled once, and landed in front of him. I will go to the Twilight Forest to take a look. I can help you stop the Allied army. Meg jumped onto the Griffin's back and said to Connie, before the Allied army of the Peace Alliance arrives, you orcs will have to hold on yourselves. The ground was shaking slightly. This was caused by tens of thousands of cavalrymen marching together. The sound of iron hooves stomping on the ground transmitted a terrifying pressure to the small tribe on the mountain. The joy of wiping out the Ironback Eagles had gradually faded. Hearing the sound of iron hooves approaching from afar, the orcs of the Crow tribe became more and more serious. However, there was almost no fear on their faces. Haga and Habing were like 2 small mountains standing on the city wall, looking down at the Roth Empire's cavalrymen, who were marching towards the Crow tribe. The canyon was long and narrow, and could only allow 3 or 4 riders to ride side by side. The road to the Crow tribe was even more winding and rugged. It was difficult to even walk on horseback, let alone charge. This terrain was a nightmare for the attackers, but for the defenders, it was a natural barrier. Good heavens, they are really coming for our tribe. There are at least 20 to 30,000 cavalrymen here. These sons of bitches really don't underestimate us at all. Haebing spat out a mouthful of saliva and said somewhat angrily, "From the moment we killed one of their flying groups, this matter can no longer be settled." Haega reached out to help him tidy up his armor, then patted him heavily on the shoulder. He smiled and said, "Are you scared?" "I'm not afraid. It's just a pity. I was going to go to Chaos City and buy a few more Rugiamos from Boss Mag in the next few days. When this battle is over, I'll take you out to eat." Haega also laughed. "All right." Haebing nodded as he looked down at the Roth Empire's cavalrymen in the valley, and suddenly felt less of a headache. The Roth Empire's cavalrymen quickly gathered at the foot of the mountain. Their formation was a safe distance away from the Crow tribe. Standing on the mountain, they could clearly see that the Crow tribe's cavalrymen were gathering quickly, but they could not do much damage to them. On the city wall, the archers and javelin throwers were ready. Behind them were the strongmen who were responsible for throwing stones. The Crow tribe did not have any magic casters. Their terrain advantage and strength were their greatest assets. After an hour of confrontation, the assembled Roth Empire's army charged towards the Crow tribe. The cavalrymen led the charge, followed by the archers in formation. More than 10 magic casters in black robes followed closely behind. The 3,000-strong vanguard advanced quickly up the mountain. "We have to get rid of those magic casters first." Haega looked at the magic casters in black robes at the back of the army with a grave expression. From the badges on their chests, there was one 8th-tier magic caster and 2 7th-tier magic casters. The rest of the magic casters were between the 5th tier and the 4th tier. On the battlefield, a magic caster's greatest use was not their ability to kill a single person, but to use magic to support the army's movements and influence the entire battle situation. The Roth Empire's army was powerful because they made magic casters a very important part of their military system, and they kept proving that this system was correct in actual battles. The cavalrymen charged, and a 7th-tier magic caster at the back raised his magic wand and began to cast a spell. The originally rugged mountain path began to twist and change. The ground shook, and a slope that was more than 10 meters wide appeared and quickly led to the Crow tribe. The cavalrymen, who were struggling to advance, suddenly sped up and charged up the mountain along the straight slope. Why did the path change? It's an earth-type magic caster. The orcs on the city wall were shocked. The rugged mountain path, that could have stopped the enemy from going up the mountain, had become a smooth path that led straight to the bottom of the city wall. It was big enough for 6 cavalrymen to charge side by side. "Don't panic. Listen to my orders," Haega shouted. "Archers, get ready." After the panic subsided, the orc archers knocked their bows and aimed at the sky. "Release the arrows." Following Haega's order, hundreds of arrows flew out from the city wall and inside the city, drawing a beautiful parabola as they fell towards the charging cavalrymen. However, just as the rain of arrows was about to land on the cavalrymen's heads, an ice barrier appeared above the cavalrymen's heads. Tuck, tuck, tuck. The arrows made a series of sounds as they hit the ice. Ice shards flew everywhere, but they could not break through the ice barrier. A huge ice block floated above the cavalrymen's heads, and they continued to charge up the mountain. The only 8th-tier magic caster in the magic casters team was reciting a spell silently. The tip of his magic wand shone faintly as he looked up the mountain with a mocking gaze. "The arrows have been blocked." The orcs' faces changed when they saw this. This was their most effective way to kill, but it was blocked by a magic caster's spell. Haebing pulled out his big knife and said angrily, "These cunning fellows only dare to hide in the back. I'll kill them." Haega reached out to stop Haebing and ordered, "Javelins, shoot!" Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Hundreds of javelins that were several meters long were thrown out by the strong orcs. The sharp tips of the javelins glinted coldly under the sunlight. The orcs' powerful strength gave these javelins terrifying speed. Thump, thump, thump. The javelins fell on the ice block with muffled sounds. The sharp tips of the javelins pierced through the ice block, but most of them were stuck in the ice block and did not cause any damage to the cavalrymen below. However, Dozens of javelins pierced through the ice block, nailing the cavalrymen and their horses to the mountain path. Dozens of holes of various sizes appeared on the ice block, but it was still firmly suspended in the air above the cavalrymen. Catapults fire. Catapults, get ready. Children and elderly, get into the cellar. Everyone else, prepare for battle. Haga calmly gave one order after another, and at the same time, he aimed his bow at the 8th tier magic caster. Chapter 1959. The flints dragged red tails as they smashed into the ice. Many of them were detonated in midair by the fireballs that flew out from below. A few of the flints that broke through the interception and landed on the ice barrier, instantly smashing a large hole in the thick ice barrier and killing a large number of knights. Most of the orcs' arrows could not break through the ice barrier, so they started to throw boulders when the enemy got closer. Although the orcs were strong, they were not trebuchets. The boulders they threw were blocked by the ice barrier and had little effect. With the magic casters joining the battle, the Utopia tribe, who had the advantage of terrain, fell into a passive position. The ramp was connected to the bottom of the city wall, and the ground below the city wall was still rising. Obviously, the earth magic caster wanted to connect the ramp directly to the top of the city wall, so that the knights could charge up the city wall and take it down at a very low cost. Once the city wall was breached, the Utopia tribe would be breached too. The orcs on the city wall all looked pale. This was the first time they had faced the Roth Empire's official army. No one would have thought that the enemy's vanguard of only 3,000 people would make the Utopia tribe so helpless and pathetic. The difference in power and strategy was magnified infinitely at this moment. The vanguard knights advanced steadily. When they were about 200 meters away from the city wall, the ice barrier suddenly disappeared and turned into a translucent light barrier. Immediately after, 1,000 archers drew their bows and shot in the direction of the Utopia tribe. A rain of arrows rained down on the orcs below the city wall. Shield! Haga roared angrily. The orcs all picked up the vine shields beside them. Tuck, tuck, tuck. The arrows landed on the vine shields. Many of them went through the thin vine shields and landed on the orcs' bodies. Screams and groans could be heard from time to time. Taking advantage of the fact that the orcs were busy defending and could not react, the 1,000 knights at the front suddenly sped up and galloped up the slope. The ground below the city wall was rising steadily and was about to connect to the top of the city wall. Swish! Right at this moment, an arrow flew through the crowd of knights and brushed past an archer's ear. It landed on the neck of the earth magic caster, who was chanting loudly with his wand raised. The terrifying force pulled him off his horse and nailed him to the slope. The slope was only 2 meters away from the city wall and could not be raised any further. The knights who were charging the fastest had already reached the city wall. Draw your swords. Kill him. Haga threw away the bow and arrow in his hand, pulled out a large saber that was standing beside him, and chopped off the head of the knight who was charging at the front. The orcs also threw away the shields in their hands, picked up their weapons, and began to kill the knights that had rushed to the bottom of the city wall. The 2-meter-tall city wall was no longer considered a high wall. A few war horses and corpses could be pieced together to form a step that was large enough to mount a horse. This offensive and defensive battle began to enter the most tragic phase of hand-to-hand combat. The magicians' incantations rang in their ears. Fireballs and icicles rained down on the tribe, killing many orcs who couldn't dodge in time. Haga and Habing were like two gods of slaughter, standing on top of the city wall with broadswords in their hands, stepping on a pile of dead knights. Second echelon, move out and take down this small tribe. We've already wasted too much time here. Charlie coldly looked at the tragic situation on the hillside and ordered. The 3,000 knights charged up the hill again, under the lead of a general, to assist the vanguard in taking down the Uddo tribe. Although the resistance in this small town was greater than they had expected, this was still a small tribe without any powerhouses guarding it. It was still vulnerable in front of the Empire's powerful army. Charlie flipped through the map in his hands and began to consider the route and target of their next march. The Edo tribe was in chaos now. The houses were set ablaze by magic fireballs. The orcs tried their best to run toward the city wall, while dodging the fireballs and icicles raining down from the sky, and engaged in a life-and-death battle with the knights who had rushed into the tribe. More than half of the city wall had been taken down. Only Haga and Habang were still surrounded by some orc warriors who were fighting a bloody battle. All of them were stained with blood, and the corpses of their tribesmen lay beside them. Despair had already spread. All the orcs knew that they couldn't hold on for much longer. What awaited them was the slaughter of the entire tribe. The Roth Empire's knights were too powerful, and the Edo tribe was no match for them. They didn't know where the reinforcements were, and no one could save them. The Roth Empire's cavalrymen also saw that victory was within their grasp. Although this tribe was small, they were far more bloodthirsty than the previous tribes. Even though they were completely outmatched, none of the orcs backed down, and made them suffer a lot. Habang sent a knight flying with his saber, and came to Haga's side. "Brother, bring your men and retreat from the back. I'll hold them off. I'll bring up the rear. You lead your men and retreat. Wait for me." Haga raised his saber to block a knight's sword that was coming at Habang. His arm was cut by another knight. "I'm not leaving." Habang cut off that knight's arm with his saber. He glared at Haga with bloodshot eyes. How could he escape now? He was risking his life to bring up the rear. "Let's preserve the Edo tribe. We can't go extinct like this." Haga pushed Habang behind him with force, and charged toward the general who was commanding the battle with his saber. "Brother!" The general also saw Haga. He pointed his sword at Haga, and said loudly, "Kill that leader, and you'll be rewarded handsomely." The surrounding knights stared at Haga with bloodshot eyes. They all charged at him with their swords. This was a moving box of gold. Everyone knew that the battle would be over once the orc leader was killed. "For the tribe!" Haga roared, and charged forward with his saber in both hands. "For the tribe!" All the orcs roared in unison. They attacked the knights one last time with bloodshot eyes. Habang turned and jumped off the city wall. He ran toward the back of the tribe with tears in his eyes. He wanted to bring the children away, and preserve the last spark of the Edo tribe. Boom! Right at this moment, a sudden clap of thunder came from the horizon. A bolt of silver lightning streaked across the sky, and arrived in front of the Edo tribe in the blink of an eye. It crashed into the crowd of knights. There was a deafening explosion, and lightning shot in all directions. Everything within a 10-meter radius was reduced to ashes. All the people and horses within a 10-meter radius were paralyzed by the electric shock. Up and down the hill, the horses were in a frenzy. Everyone was thrown off their feet, and it was chaos. The lightning gradually dissipated, and in the center stood a heavy sword glowing with lightning. "The Tiandu sword!" a knight exclaimed. "Awa!" Right at this moment, a long howl came from the sky. A purple-striped griffin descended from the sky, and stopped in the air above the Edo tribe. On top of the lion vulture, there was a man wearing silver soft armor. That man had finally arrived. Chapter 1960. The intense battlefield seemed to have come to a standstill. Due to the lightning storm, there was a 10-meter-wide vacuum outside the city walls. Everyone looked up at the man, sitting on the back of the majestic griffin in midair with shock on their faces. The Tiandu sword, the purple-striped griffin, and the familiar silver armor all revealed this man's identity. Alex, the godlike man in the hearts of the soldiers of the Roth Empire's northwestern military region. No one would have thought that he would appear here, and even attack the knights of the Roth Empire. The Tiandu sword that descended from the sky attracted a terrifying bolt of lightning, and instantly turned over 100 knights, including the vanguard general, into ashes. The warhorses were all trembling on the ground under the purple-striped griffin's might, and didn't dare to move. One man and one sword, and thousands of knights lost their ability to fight in an instant. The knights of the Roth Empire were shocked. Alex's terrifying power had once made the northwestern military region proud, but now that they were standing opposite him, they realized how terrifying it was. The orcs of the Crow tribe were also shocked to see Alex, who had suddenly appeared. Alex's reputation among the orcs was even greater than that of the king of the Roth Empire. This man was invincible. He had once beaten up all the orcs near the borders of the Roth Empire, and had never been defeated. Now this man had appeared again, but his first attack was against the knights of the Roth Empire. Haga kept his saber, and slowly retreated. He gathered the orcs on the city walls again, and also looked at Alex cautiously. He also didn't understand why Alex would appear here, and attack the Roth Empire's army. In the valley below the slope, the knights were also at a loss because of the sudden change. The screams from the mountain had already revealed the identity of the man who had come. He was the god of war in their hearts. Why is Alex here? Charlie's expression was also filled with shock and bewilderment. As a veteran general who had been stationed at the northwestern border for 30 years, he had witnessed Alex's growth. He had risen from a small fry in the border army all the way to the top, and had made countless outstanding military achievements. He had become the god of war in the northwestern border army, and the #1 knight on the Norland continent. He had heard about what had happened after that. Alex had been attacked and disappeared in Rodu. There were rumors that he had already died, while there were also rumors that he had disappeared. The Northwest Army was furious and almost caused a mutiny, but it was suppressed later. Those who were close to Alex were purged. As Xiaowen's trusted aide, he had received quite a bit of promotion, and had become a general with real power. Just as everyone gradually forgot about Alex, he suddenly appeared again. He was still that invincible knight, but he no longer belonged to the Roth Empire and the Northwestern Army. He had killed experts from various races one after another, and stepped onto the path of vengeance. Furthermore, he had even made a move against the first prince and second prince. It seemed that the ambush back then was not as simple as the rumors made it out to be. Today was the first day of the peace conference, and he should be attending the conference in Chaos City. Why did he suddenly appear here? And they even attacked the Roth Empire's cavalry. Charlie's eyelids twitched uncontrollably at the thought that this person whom he had only looked up to in the past had suddenly become his opponent. Even though he had 30,000 cavalrymen under his command, he still did not feel at ease at all. Meg's eyes were burning with fury. He had seen many orc tribes that had been slaughtered along the way. Even the children were not spared. It was hard to imagine that such a tragedy, which was no different from a devil's act, was actually caused by the Roth Empire's cavalry. Meg had thought that the Roth Empire wanted territory before he came, but now it seemed that they were not satisfied with that. He lowered his head to look at the small tribe that was in a tragic state below, and found Haga, who was covered in blood in the crowd. He was a little surprised, but at the same time, he calmed down a little. He did not expect that the first tribe he had rushed to would be Haga and Habang's tribe. Although they had suffered heavy losses, at least they had avoided being wiped out. I am Alex, a cavalry of the Roth Empire. Withdraw from this tribe immediately, Meg said in a low voice. The cavalrymen looked at each other. They had not recovered from the confusion of Alex attacking them, and now he was asking them to withdraw from this tribe that they had taken so much effort to conquer? However, Alex's deterrence was stronger than the entire tribe, and his influence in the northwestern military region was still there. The cavalrymen all withdrew from the Crow tribe and retreated behind the Tian-Du sword. Meg glanced at the cavalrymen. As soldiers, it was their duty to obey orders. The decision to attack and massacre a tribe was not something they could influence. His gaze landed on the black-armored general, who was surrounded by the cavalrymen in the valley below. His eyes narrowed slightly. It was an old acquaintance. Charlie, the old fox by Sean's side, could be considered an old general in the northwestern military region. Who would have thought that he was the one leading this army? Go down, Meg said. The purple-striped griffin swooped down into the valley. There was a commotion among the cavalrymen in the valley. All the knights and magic casters surrounded Charlie with their swords drawn, and looked nervously at the purple-striped griffin that was swooping down. Don't act rashly, Charlie said in a low voice. Looking at the purple-striped griffin that was swooping down, he swallowed hard and tried to remain calm. If Alex wanted to kill someone, they would not be able to stop him. The Crown Prince had lost an arm, even under the protection of 6th 10th tier powerhouses. They were a group of 8th and 9th tier knights and magic casters. Any reaction in front of Alex would be a joke. The purple-striped griffin stopped in midair in front of Charlie. Meg looked down at Charlie and said coldly, "Who gave the order to massacre the beast men?" "Military order," Charlie said in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing. "Who gave the order?" "This is a military secret. I can't tell you," Charlie said as he looked at Alex. Meg narrowed his eyes, and his aura became colder. "Now, I want all of you to withdraw from the Twilight Forest." "I'm sorry, but I can't obey a military order." Charlie shook his head and gripped the sword at his waist. "If you don't withdraw, you will die." Meg's cold voice reverberated throughout the valley. On the mountain, the Tiandu sword that was nailed to the ground flew up and came to Meg's side in the blink of an eye. It was flashing with lightning, showing off its sharpness. "Alex, I know you are very powerful, but you should also know that a soldier's will not change because of any threat," Charlie said coldly to Meg as he pulled out the sword at his waist. He was betting that Alex would not dare to kill him. Just like how he had only severed one arm of the Crown Prince, even after he had broken through 6th 10th tier powerhouses. Killing him would be equivalent to declaring war with the Roth Empire. Just as he said that, the Tiandu sword fell. Charlie and his horse were nailed to the ground. Meg looked at the lieutenant standing beside Charlie and coldly said, "According to the Roth Empire's military rules, you are now the commander of this team. Bring all the knights and leave the Twilight Forest." Top point. Chapter 1961. Charlie was dead. The soldiers stared at Charlie, who had been nailed to the ground with a single blow. Their faces were filled with shock. Charlie was a powerful grade 9 knight who had been honed on the battlefield for a long time and had rich battle experience. However, such a powerful knight was so weak in front of Alex. The way he killed him was like a giant accidentally trampling an ant to death. He couldn't even lower his head to take a look. He killed the commander. The beastmen on the mountain also saw this scene and were filled with shock. "He's here to help us." Haga thought for a moment before a hint of joy appeared on his face. "If you don't retreat, I will cut off that mountain and leave all of you here to pay for the lives of those innocent beastmen," Meg said calmly. There were steep mountains on both sides of the canyon. All 30,000 knights were in this canyon. If Alex really cut off the mountain, all of them would be buried. No one would survive. No one doubted whether Alex could cut off the mountain. The upper limit of human strength was meaningless to him. This was not a negotiation. This was an order and a naked threat. Meg saw the hesitation on the lieutenant's face and frowned. He glanced at the Tiandu sword. "We will immediately retreat from the Twilight Forest," the lieutenant shouted. His voice was trembling as he gave the order to retreat. The rear of the formation became the head of the formation. The knights on the mountain carried the corpses of their comrades and began to retreat. "They're retreating. We survived." The beastmen of the Utopia tribe cried tears of joy. Some of them picked up their bows, but Haga stopped them. "Treat the wounded. Don't let any more of our tribe die," Haga ordered. Looking at the devastated tribe, this tough man's eyes were already red. Meg put away the Tiandu sword and watched the cavalry retreat into the canyon. He then rode his griffin back to the Utopia tribe. "Thank you for saving the lives of the Utopia tribe." Haga placed one hand on his chest and bowed to Meg. The other beastmen also put down the things in their hands and bowed deeply to Meg. If he had not appeared in time, the Wu Tua tribe would have ceased to exist. "No need to thank me. Since the beastmen have joined the Peace Alliance, we are allies. It is only right for us to help you resist your enemies." Meg looked at the many injured people below. The Wu Tua tribe had suffered heavy casualties in this battle, but the children had all been protected. He waved his hand, and a pile of healing medicine appeared on the ground below. "Take this medicine and treat the injured. I still have to rush to the next place, so I can't stay for long," Meg said as he rode the purple-striped griffin away from the Utopo tribe. "Quick, take these medicines and treat the wounded," Haga hurriedly said. The Beastmen tribe lacked these things the most. Usually, They would just casually get some herbs to treat the injured. The medicine in the tribe was simply not enough for the injured. Brother, why is he helping us? Isn't he from the Roth Empire? Hagar climbed up the wall and asked Haga with a perplexed expression. He should have left the Roth Empire and belongs to the Peace Alliance now. It's right for us to follow the Falk tribe, Haga said thoughtfully. Ding! The host has prevented the massacre of an entire tribe. You have received 4,000 mission points. A voice sounded in Meg's mind, interrupting his thoughts. Mission points. Meg raised his eyebrows. System, what is this? Maintaining world peace is a very broad mission. So this mission will use mission points as the measurement of the host's mission completion rate. Please continue to work hard and maintain world peace. The system's voice sounded. Mag looked at the 124,000 mission points that he had accumulated. It seemed that the system had determined that he had earned 120,000 mission points for his argument with Andre during the peace conference. The Wu Tua tribe had a population of 4,000 to 5,000, and Meg had received 4,000 mission points for stopping the massacre. This meant that one life was equivalent to one mission point. Interesting, Meg pondered, and then asked. But system, what is the final reward for this mission? It can't be just a recipe, right? The reward for this mission is based on the number of mission points you receive. The more mission points you have, the better the reward. Anything is possible. Forget it. Anything is possible. And it's not worth looking forward to. In any case, everything that you can offer is within my imagination. Mag rolled his eyes. Unless you can make me the god of cookery. Nonsense. This system also has unlimited possibilities. The system said seriously. Meg pursed his lips. He did not want to continue arguing with the system. He got Azzy to fly north to find the next army. The Roth Empire and the Orcs had a deep grudge. As the former commander of the Northwestern Allied Army, Alex was familiar with the many plans the Northwestern Allied Army had for conquering the Twilight Forest. This six-way army was one of them, and according to the progress of this army, he could roughly guess the location of the other troops. Although he had only promised Connie and the rest that he would send an army, he still could not control his anger when he saw the massacred tribes. Ding! Emergency! Extremely dense black fog has been detected 80 kilometers northeast. There might be great old ones there. Host, please go and check it out immediately. Right at this moment, the system's voice sounded again with a hint of anxiousness. Meg was stunned when he heard that. He immediately got Azzy to change direction and fly northwest. At the same time, he asked in his heart, System, what's going on? The current situation is unknown, the system answered. Is it a coincidence or a conspiracy? Meg frowned. The northeast direction should have been swept clean by the Roth Empire's cavalry, but the demonic aura of the Great Old Ones appeared there. Meg recalled the terrifying content on the mural. The devil who created chaos and war greedily absorbed the resentment. I hope it's not what I think it is. Meg's expression turned cold, and he got Azzy to speed up. Danger is approaching quickly. We have to leave this place temporarily. At the same time, Josh, who had just absorbed all the resentment of this medium-sized tribe, licked his lips in satisfaction. The devil's voice sounded in his mind. What danger? Josh's long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly, and he slowly clenched his fists. The increase in power made his heart stronger as well. He was looking for an opponent to test his strength. He was just a little bit away from breaking through to 10th tier. It's the person you don't want to see the most. The current you is still not his match. Alex. Josh's eyes flashed with murderous intent. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.